All right. I've just received the hi sign like this. Jim waved hi to me. Jim Way is our executive director, and he's the one who manages all the logistics and coordinations and scripts and all that stuff. As you see, I've got pages and pages of script, which I do the appropriate thing with. I'm sorry, Jim. But I do pay attention to it. The first thing I'm supposed to do here is have the next slide, which is to thank our sponsors. There we are. Thank you to our sponsors. I'm not going to read them all off again to you. You can see them. I have to turn around to do that. But thank you for our sponsors. Without them, we would not have a conference that was as easy to put together and as comfortable as we are in this conference, and we'd be chasing money instead of chasing program. So having these folks jump in early as we're doing the planning and say they'll support it allowed us to spend time worrying about the program instead of worrying about paying for the conference. So thank you very much to our sponsors. So our next session is ISS commercialization, one of my favorite ones. We put something like this together last year, I think, and I fostered one like this off on IAC a year or two ago, or three. And Bobby Watkins is our moderator, and Bobby has been with NASA, I didn't believe it was, 32 years, long time, but he's had really an interesting set of jobs. He's been Director of Legislative Liaison Division, but he's not a lawyer. I don't think he's a lawyer, but he's been in D.C. for a long time doing that. He's Director of NASA's Marshall's Office of Strategic Analysis and Communications, but he is not a marketing guy. He doesn't have a marketing degree. He was Chief of Staff at Johnson, and he doesn't have a personnel degree. He's done all these jobs he doesn't know anything about, kind of like him. And he was also the director at Marshall's Michoud Assembly Facility, and he does have an engineering degree, so he had a job he knew how to do. But Bobby actually manages the best-kept secret of Marshall. And it's not necessarily best kept because it should be kept a secret, but just because it is kept a secret. And that he manages all of Marshall's support to its deep involvement, and let's take the word support out, let's just say Marshall's deep involvement in ISS and in development of the exploration programs and the lunar complex that we're going to have in a few years. Bobby is the first director of the Human Exploration Development and Operations Office at the center here. And that center the office was formed in 2017 and oversees Marshall's human exploration-themed space operations in and beyond low Earth orbit, including commercial space transportation, complementing NASA's space launch system, and supporting increased science in the International Space Station. So he's responsible for supporting all of the PIs, managing the POC, managing all the life support work that's done here, and in the future managing one of our components of the lunar complex. So Bobby?
Thank you, Alan. Thank you guys for being here today. Let me just kind of say a few words about Alan, and again, thank you for all what he does for AAS, and also Jim Way, and also Chris. I mean, let's give those guys a round of applause. They do a heck of a job pulling all this together. Did everyone get a chance to enjoy lunch? Everybody had a good lunch? All right, so I'm gonna true confessions. I had two desserts. Anybody try the pecan pie? I had the pecan pie, and it was ridiculously good, but I'm a chocolate lover as well. So I had two desserts. I am wired and ready to go, all right? Now, if I crash and burn, you guys make sure you so remember Jody said, you look to your left, you look to your right. If you see somebody kind of nodding a little bit, just kind of nudge them a little bit and just kind of keep them engaged, all right? Yeah, we're gonna. Matter of fact, we can do a 7-inning stretch. We may do that. Hey, yeah. Hey guys, we got a very interesting panel discussion for you today. Just walking over with some of the panel members, I can probably have two guys just have a discussion by themselves, but we're going to really make this more interactive. Start thinking about your questions or things you have from a commercialization perspective. I remember a while back when the administration first talked about retiring the International Space Station in 2025, and we were getting our thoughts together on what that meant from a marshal perspective and a payload operations perspective. And someone mentioned, ISS, Bobby, is going out of business. And I said, no, ISS is not going out of business. What this means, this is our next logical step from the federal government to make sure our industry partners are fully engaged with commercialization. And when I say commercialization, one of the things that are key to me is one thing to have a vendor to come in and do just your day-to-day work, but true commercialization is setting up a process, a entity where they can also bring in profit with some of the capabilities that they bring to bear. So I think you're going to hear a very lively discussion this afternoon. And again, feel free. What I will do from a format perspective, I will introduce the speakers. They will go through their materials or their charts or their presentation with you, and then we're going to save time at the end. So just think about what questions you have, and feel free to get those questions on the table. And we got the right guys that are going to give you some great answers, okay? So again, good afternoon. Welcome to our panel discussion for commercialization of International Space Station. As many of you know, NASA has asked 13 companies, one including that is represented on the panel today, Nanorex, to study how the International Space Station commercialization can happen and provide answers to questions like, how would business plans look? How viable would a habitation platform look? How can the federal government take a different approach or a different role when it comes to commercialization? We're hoping to get some insight on all these particular aspects of the study later on this year, and of course we'll be working that through overall processes on the federal side of the house. In the meantime, again, we have a great panel of participants that's going to talk to us today about commercialization and some of the things they're doing from a commercialization perspective. Our first panelist is going to be Lee Jankowski. Lee is a Senior Director of Business Development for the Space Systems at Teledyne Brown here in town, here in Huntsville. Teledyne has designed, built, launched, and installed the multi-user systems for Earth sensing, or the MUSIS platform, on board the International Space Station. Earlier this month, the first hyperspectral images from DLR, images that were taken and sent back to Earth from the International Space Station. The imager was designed by DLR, but was the first payload hosted aboard the Teledyne platform. Lee is going to tell us more about that experience and some other things they're also doing from a Teledyne Brown perspective. Lee.
Okay, thank you, Bobby, and thank you, AES, for allowing us to be on the panel. I am Lee Jankowski. I'm with Teledyne Brown. We're across the street here from UAH. I'm actually a UH grad, 1984, so if we've got some students here, gets to the questions, try not to ask too many difficult ones to me. You can pass them on as a fellow alumni. Teledyne Brown, we are one of 70 of the Teledyne technology companies. We're the largest, based out of Thousand Oaks, California. What we've got here is a timeline of all the major programs that we've worked in space. If you see, we started in the early 50s. Von Braun brought us over from Atlanta, and we were a machine shop, brought us over, got us started. So we've been in every major program since the early 50s through Apollo and Skylab and ISS, and now we're doing payload operations and integration with Bobby for the space station. We're moving into SLS now. We're building the LVSA, the Launch Vehicle Stage Adapter. We're about ready to deliver that. We are also doing flight systems operations analysis for SLS. We're doing that as part of one of our task orders for our mission ops and integration contract. And now we're moving into gateway utilization too. So we're doing some ops concept for utilization for gateway also. So I didn't talk about several of the platforms. I think that Bobby kind of stole a little bit of thunder what we're doing, but that's good. We started MUSES in 2012. We had a cooperative agreement with NASA to build this nadir pointing platform with four locations on it. We did install MUSES last summer in June. It's been operating flawlessly since. We did install last month the DLR DSIS hyperspectral imager and started receiving imagery within 48 hours. So why did we invest? in my charts, I'm trying to address a little bit about why commercialization of ISS. So I'm wanting to talk a little bit about why and some of our barriers, and that's basically what these two charts will be. So the first one with Muses, why did we invest? The infrastructure's there for the ISS. We know that. We've operated, I think, almost 3,000 payloads on our contract, so we're very familiar with the power, data, thermal, payload return capability. There was a growing Earth observation commercial market. There was for processing of data, storing of data in T-Cloud, and we wanted to take advantage of that. We have a corporate legacy of doing remote sensing. One of our sister companies is Teledyne Imaging, and of course the ISS payload operations work that we're talking about. Our value proposition is that we can put an equivalent instrument on board for half the cost of a free-flying satellite. Risk and barriers. When we first started this endeavor in 2012, we were really attacking that market of the big buses and knew that this would be a lesser expensive value proposition. But about that time, we had small sats hit the market, and we had to redirect some of our concepts of how to get payloads on board. And so we've looked at using maybe tech demos and putting multiple payloads in canisters. We've been working that scenario. We're also trying to get the contract to launch time. That it's about 18 months right now. We want to get it down to less than 12 months. We're working that. Another barrier is just the market awareness of Muses, and I think that's something that we all share. It's not a NASA responsibility. It's not a CASIS. It's industry too, and we're trying to work through that. CASIS is doing a remote sensing challenge right now with us. We hope to have an announcement. I think we've had down select for another instrument, and in March I think we're going to announce the winner of that competition. And we also have a couple of announcements that we're close to making right now that are very close to adding to fill in those 4 slots. So again, recommendations, improvements, again, it's just making the market aware of it. Get out there. We've got a panelist up in Virginia right now at an oceanographer type venue where he's on a panel taking questions from them, from PhDs, and seeing if there's other instruments and applicability there. All right, so this is the one that draws the most attention whenever we talk to people around, we talk to the kids around town. The Sierra Nevada, is this still there? It's Sierra Nevada Dream Chaser, the landing here at Huntsville. And we came up with a concept back in 2014, Teledyne Brown did, to land a Dream Chaser at a commercial airport. And we had 2 different options, 2 different mission sets. We had an ISS return that made sense to leave the ISS, commercial resupply, to land at Huntsville. And then we looked at some sorties. So right now we've got 2 different orbit analyses that we're doing for this licensing. We've got one that's a return from ISS, and then we've got a Space Lab low inclination equatorial type orbit, so that if we go to a different mission set. We did the feasibility study back in 2015. We wanted to make sure that we could land there. There's a skid plate on the front of the Dream Chaser you might see. We were concerned about it possibly damaging an asphalt runway, since it wasn't intended for asphalt. It was for concrete. It's an Inconel skid plate. We brought a test article down, did the test, it passed. We had RSNH in town. They did work for us too. They did the environmental preliminary. It passed, so we were good to go. The next step was to secure the funding, and that took a little bit of time. It's a community thing. The Chamber of Commerce was heavily involved with us, working with the Huntsville mayor, the Madison mayor, the county commission, the state senators, the governor's office, the FAA, our senators, the airport, our leadership, Sierra Nevada. It was everybody involved, and we did secure the funding. It was about $1 million to do all this analysis to get this license submitted to the FAA. So we started last year, and then in 2019, we fully expect in December of 19 to submit a fully compliant license. The FAA reserves about 6 months to review it and send comments back. So we're on schedule for that. So why did we invest? Again, the diverse payloads and hardware that's on board the ISS today. That opened up our potential customers for this region, this area, from UAH to UAB, to Hudson Alpha, to Marshall Hardware from Ecolist and Redstone Arsenal payloads. So it opened it up, just the diversity of the ISS. Another reason was the 35-year history again, plus of Teledyne doing payload ops and integration, and the strong commitment from the community. So risks and barriers for this project has been passing the feasibility and securing funding. We've done that. Now it's securing the mission. We've now got the U.S. Space and Rocket Center involved offering help, and the newly formed Alabama Space Authority is offered support too to get missions to land here. So we've got Senator Dial involved with that process too. How do we improve commercialization? I mean, from this niche, I mean, it is a specific niche, but the FAA relationships, we've got to continue to grow those. It's something that, you know, we got introduced to. We hadn't worked with FAA before. They're new. They're getting a lot of commercial customers, a lot of spaceports and contact with them, and we're working lockstep with them, and we're developing that relationship. And I think for other airports to have this opportunity, I think they've got to do the same thing. When we do get this license, I will say that there will only be two places that Dream Chaser can land in the world, and the other one will be KSC, and we're only 1 month behind in their development to get the licensing. So we're very close to them, and no one else has started. So I know there's a lot of talk of spaceports and what other airports are doing and all, but no, we're out ahead of it in the Huntsville area. The last thing, too, is to build on commercial competitions. The Chamber of Commerce has done a really good job of working with ESA and their Space Exploration Masters competition. It's the second year where they're identifying payloads that can meet this mission set for a mission to land at Huntsville with a Dream Chaser type capability.
Thank you, Lee. Appreciate that. Again, start thinking about your questions. I almost about ready to ask a question just then, but I'm going to try to wait. So I said we're going to follow this format. So thank you very much for that. So our next presenter, next panel member is Mark Kinsley, who has 25 years of aerospace management experience with the Airbus Group in Europe and in the U.S. He is currently the Airbus resident liaison for the European service module located at the Lockheed Martin Space System in Denver. Mark, tell us more about your commercial adventures and what you guys are doing with Airbus.
Great, thank you very much. So I've worked for Airbus for, dare I say it, over a quarter of a century. Depending which country you're in, it could be Airbus if you're French, or Airbus if you're British or American. Just a few things. Airbus Human Space Activities in the USA. We're obviously a very large company, 130,000 people worldwide. The space part used to be called MBB Erno, then Astrium. We change the names every couple of years just to make sure we go through the business cards quickly. So I just want to say we do have an operational unit. We sit next door to Jeff's NanoRacks outfit. We work very well with NanoRacks. I put the US flag on because I'm also a recent US citizen as well. So I just want to say we are a 100% US organization here, based in Houston. I'm based in Denver, work for that office. And we have a lot of heritage there. So we've been established here since 1973, actually, in Florida and in Texas, and now in Denver. So we've done a lot of shuttle stuff with payload carriers. We've been involved, obviously, with integrated cargo carriers, very commercial in terms of owning the platforms and then using them for shuttle flights, including payload integration. We've done a lot of work recently with cases. One of the interesting ones was the Sphere's tether demo, which was quite a lot of fun. And again, we're doing slosh modeling as well to help out with the propellant management devices on our propellant tanks. So we've done a lot of that. Commercialization, we've worked with Jeff on the NanoRacks external platform on the design and development with our next door neighbors and integration operation. And of course, the STARS platform, where we developed the avionics. And I'll talk a bit about Bartolomeo. It's a bit of a mouthful. He's the younger brother of Christopher Columbus. That's basically the thing. And we'll get back into that in a minute. My day job is the Orion service module. We'll have it delivered in Kennedy Space Center, hopefully at the beginning of the month. So the teams are working hard at the moment in Germany on that. So industrialization and commercialization, we've done a lot of industrialization already in Europe. We've operated the Columbus under an industrial operator team, so we're very used to that, and that's transferring responsibility to the private sector. So that's worked very well. And commercialization, what's the goal of that? I guess, in every agency, whether ESA or NASA, the budgets are very flat. We want to make more efficient use of the budget and stuff like that. So commercial, certainly handing it over to private industry, to, I would say, NASA being the landlord, and we're sort of developing the services on top of that. That's really the idea. And you'll get some very interesting ideas, innovative ideas, and I'll come back to some of them in a minute. But I think essentially increasing the efficiency. If I take a point out of my previous life in commercial launch services, I remember as a young lad, if you wanted to launch a satellite on the launch vehicle, it would take 3 years integration time or something like that. Arianespace pioneered that, we got down that, and its industry standard is 12 months. So it's a sort of parallel to what we want to do with payloads, essentially, is have a very quick turnaround time. So we've seen this before, but there's a lot of potential. We want to get new actors involved outside of the space sector. And I think our motivation as well is, there's more risk, but there's potential for more profit as well. So I'll go very quickly through. So we want to do pathfinder cases, test the market. So as I said, real estate development with Bartolomeo. Bartolomeo is not an ESA platform, NASA platform. A lot of support from both, but it's privately funded by Airbus. So we want to work with both entities and other customers essentially to do that, and I'll come back to that in a minute. It's a great platform. We're also building a thing called ACLS, Advanced Closed Loop Life Support System. It's just been launched. It's going to be commissioned soon, where we're producing breathable oxygen via electrolysis. Once we get that going, we actually want to have a system in place where we sell the services, basically breathing air to the station, essentially. So that'd be quite good. So as a service, so we produce oxygen, and hopefully that's the model we want to go down. We want fossil utilization demand because I think if we can make this attractive, lower barriers to entry, I think this will be excellent, and we'll get, I think it'll snowball. And as I increase, affordability, there's a lot of innovation out there. It's an exciting time at the moment with all these different actors coming in. So that's the key. So you can see on the right-hand side there now, facility in Friedrichshafen, the ACLS, which should be commissioned next month. Again, Bartolomeo is an all-in-one mission service, very highly competitive rates. I don't have them in top of my head, but certainly very, very attractive. You don't need to design the platform, the bus. We want to try and aim to 12 months integration time. You can see there on the right-hand side of that picture at the top, we've got viewing in 3 directions, nadir, zenith, and RAM. And we can cope with all sorts of payloads. And of course, we want to have the right platform for the right, applications. So there's a few platforms around, so we'll all be fine. And we're it's exciting times at the moment, and we'll get this stuff put through the airlock and placed in there by a robotic arm. So as I say, highly cost-effective. We're using, a Gold 2 interface there, which is very highly cost-effective as well. And we have I think we probably have one of the highest data rates there, downlinks. We're very excited about it. We should be ready to operate early 2020, and we've got some serious customers getting prepared for that. So just some remaining thoughts. So what's the motivation? We've been doing traditional business a lot, but I would say that in Airbus Europe, we've been used to firm fixed price. ATV was firm fixed price, for instance. Orion service modules, firm fixed price. So we need to increase the potential market size. We've got to look at other markets, and if we can streamline this and make it more attractive, we can get more business because the budgets are flat in in different parts of the world. So I say stress is really services. We've pioneered that with communication satellites, MILCOM sats as well, and be very, very flexible and pragmatic. Of course, we will take on more risk. We're investing our own money, but because of that, I think we can accept some potential risk to fail, obviously not affecting safety, but we want to take more risks in terms of that so that we can have a less complex system and drive down the cost of the missions. Democratize space access so that everybody has an opportunity. And as I said, last but not least, I don't want to bring more regulation into this. We want to commercialize, but on the other hand, we want to try and align common interfaces and standards. I know this is an issue with Orion, with European standards and US, but that's about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Very insightful. So again, a lot of great questions. I think that's going to come from that as well. Now we'll move on to our third panelist. I will say I had the pleasure of talking to Jeff just a couple of weeks ago when we were at the IAC. But from a form introduction, of course, Jeff Mamber is the CEO of NanoRacks, whose company became the first commercial space station company with customers. NanoRacks has launched over 700 payloads. Today, Jeff is focused on owning and operating private space stations called outposts in low Earth orbit. And with that, Jeff, tell us more about, maybe talk a little bit more about scalability and what you see from a commercialization perspective, and share us all your information with us.
I'd like to do that. One of the strokes, before I, then the challenge from the moderator. Before I begin, one of the challenges we all face on commercialization on the ISS, I mean, to everybody in this room and to all in the industry, I mean, how cool is it that we work on the space station? To the financial community, it's like having a good franchise on the Titanic. I mean, it has a set lifetime, and it is extremely difficult. That may be the captain calling. It's extreme. Yeah, it's extremely difficult to envision, especially for a company like NanoRacks, which is focused on space station for most of our revenue, to try and figure out how to scale beyond that. I mean, you say all the logical things. You say 2024 or 2028 is a long time away. Okay, I mean, we wish every program had the guarantee and the stability that we have in this industry with station. But for the financial community, you must show that scalability, and I'll touch on it, the outpost moving beyond ISS is the scalability that we're looking for. But it's really jumping ahead, but you challenged me to do that, so, okay. So NanoRacks was the first company to own and operate its own hardware on the space station. We started 9 years ago, and we went to NASA and said, we don't want your funding, which got NASA's interest. And to date, in a variety of hardware, we've invested over $40 million. And we're a small company. We're 9 years old. We're about 60 people. And the hardware starts with the Nano Lab, small, standardized, talk about standardization, laboratories that go into a powered platform. And just as an aside, I'll say I personally made the decision 9 years ago not to patent the Nano Lab. And I remember Jason Grzan was so happy at headquarters, and we made that decision because I wanted an ecosystem. And as you're hearing today, I mean, all of us, in one sense, we're competitors, in another sense, we're not, and in another sense, we're in this together. And we need that interoperability. We need an ecosystem. So today, on the Nano Labs, NanoRacks is competition from a couple of companies, domestically and in Europe, and we're hopeful that helps the market to grow. And as you've heard, we have customers. We have customers in 32 nations now. And that's pretty awesome for a small company, and it's really been extraordinary help from NASA, the program office, headquarters. One of the first customers we had from a non-ISS partner nation was University of Hanoi, and we were very fortunate that not only did NASA support that, but all the ISS partners had to vote to approve a payload. And that was our first one, and after that, we're sort of off to the races. And so now as I said, we've had 32 countries that have been represented. Let me say something. I've been in Washington for a while now, and being stubborn, I've had one of the same arguments for the past 20-something years that I've been in Washington. You can be commercial, and you can have a commercial customer, and that commercial customer can be a government organization. There's a big debate in Washington. You know, ESA to us is a customer, and they're commercial. NASA is a customer at times to us, and thank you for all that. It's commercial. It's our hardware. We invested in it. If we don't produce, we don't get paid. That's commercial. Just like when Mike flew here today from Houston, he flew, as a commercial customer. He didn't design the plane. He didn't develop the plane. They probably get better prices than when we fly because they're bulk. No, I mean, just to go through the market. But it's still a commercial customer. So sometimes people say, you're being hypocritical. You got ESA and NASA. But a lot of times that's as a commercial customer. And that's changing the public-private partnership that we'll talk about right now. So, I mean, one of the most fascinating things for me at NASA now for 9 years has been the changing public-private partnership between us and the program office and NASA. When we started off, neither side kind of knew what we were talking about. Well, I'll speak for myself. I didn't really know what we were talking about in terms of public-private partnerships. What do we have to invest? And over time, first with our nanolabs and then our satellite deployment system, we've deployed over 200 satellites from the space station. We paid for the deployers. We had the concept. We developed the market, but we couldn't do it without using the NASA agreements with JAXA. And so there was a growing public-private partnership there. Then we've come up with the idea of the Bishop airlock. Why are we doing an airlock when we have the Japanese airlock? I mean, why is the private sector willing to commit funds to do an airlock when one exists now? It's an investment in the station. Our airlock will be 5 times bigger than the Japanese airlock. We hope it will be run more efficiently. No offense to our dear friends at JAXA, because it's the commercial sector. And it'll be more in tune for the way we see the market developing. And then finally, as Bobby mentioned, we're looking at developing private space platforms, plural, using repurposed upper stages of the Atlas V. We're working with our good friends at Boeing down here in Decatur with ULA, with Maxar and SSL, Mike Gold, who you'll hear from later in the next panel. And there, the public-private partnership has to be far more mature. What does the private sector contribute? What does the NASA contribute? We've been aware from the beginning that we're on a government-funded platform, the ISS. And from the beginning, I've really been clear that we have to give back as much as we can. And sometimes Mike and I reached agreements that we would provide services to NASA for what we were developing, and NASA was contributing the resources. So there's no one single answer. I will say to your question before as to why did we invest, where do we see the market? On a macro sense, I see the macro change as government as customer. And we're developing commercial marketplace in the States, which is a wonderful thing, where space is becoming a legitimate marketplace in crewed space, in space stations, in satellite deployment, just as it's been for satellite communications for some time now. This is, I think, if I press, this is a video. Nope. Okay, it wasn't a video of it. I guess, and I thought there was a slide that said, or maybe you can't read it. I'll say one of the concerns, one of the challenges, Bobby asked us to look at the challenges, and one of the challenges that we face, we're concerned about at NanoRacks, is we've made this investment of, in this case, some $40 million into the station, and you've heard from Teledyne Braun and Airbus that they've made contributions and investments as well. Well, how do you lock that in, the upmass? How do you lock in the station resources? How, under the present situation, can we ensure that our investments will allow us to have access to our own hardware in the years to come? And right now, all of us are grappling at NASA and the private sector. What is the policy? What is the policy for access? What is the policy to use the space station in the future? how do you treat folks differently who may have no hardware on the station? And I would argue you should treat folks differently, who may have maybe a small piece of hardware on the station, to those on this panel who have major multi-million-dollar investments. And that's one of the things that we're grappling to solve the problem. And the administrator has appointed Mr. Gold here over on the left to bring to him your problems. And he's going to be, he'll be working over the next few months to try and figure out, among other things, how do we ensure that those who are making the private sector investments today have access in a way that makes sense to the station in the future? And I guess that's it. Fat chance.
All right, thank you, Jeff. That was very informative as well. Okay, so you heard from industry, some of our industry partners. Next, I want to turn it over to Mike Reed. Mike and I had a chance to do a similar type discussion. I think it was last year, maybe more on utilization and payload operations. But Mike is out at NASA Johnson Space Center. He's the manager for the commercial space utilization for the ISS program. And Mike, I think you are the right person to really kind of help solidify and kind of talk about what is the right approach for commercialization, or even before that, what is commercialization, and how are all these pieces coming together, and how you're going to define all that, and how we're going to move together as a government partner with industry, et cetera.
So what you're really asking is, why are these guys and their companies all crazy enough to put money into space, and why is that important to us? So that's probably where I ought to start, which is really the end. I want to go tell you what our goal is, and then I'll come back and tell you what we've done and why. So the goal, while we've got ISS, is to use its assets, its resources, to help companies like these and others develop a vibrant, robust economy in low Earth orbit. Because when ISS is gone, they're still going to need a platform. We certainly are still going to need a platform. So the end game is, as it's been mentioned here, is government as a customer, just not the only customer. That's just not sustainable anymore. So all of these guys and their companies and their investments are players in this bigger picture of trying to enable an economy in LEO. And I say enable because we're the government. We may try to help, but we generally end up not really helping. We can't create. The private sector has to create. We can kill something, but we can, better yet, try to set the environment whereby guys like this and companies can see opportunities and exploit that, especially leveraging the ISS while we have it, but then ultimately to carry that on afterwards. So why do we care? We put out a transition report last spring. And one of the key takeaways, if anybody looked at that, was clear, is that NASA is always going to have a need for a platform in LEO. We're going to do fundamental, decadal-driven research. We're going to do applied research. We'll probably be doing national lab research, which is other government agencies, commercial sector, whatnot. We'll also be training our astronauts. We're not going to fly crews to deep space. It's almost a certainty on their first mission. We're gonna do crew proficiency in low Earth orbit. We'll do crew training, but more importantly, we're going to test out next generation systems, because fluids and things like that just don't work the same in microgravity that they do in 1G, and I just don't see us sending advanced systems to deep space before they've been proven in microgravity. So NASA's always going to have a need, and so it's important to us. Well, okay, the other takeaway is, and it's pretty clear, but I'm going to say it anyway, is that ISS is almost certainly the last government-driven platform in LEO. It's not going to be another one. The budgets don't support it. So having said the first one, which is we're always going to have a need, and knowing the second one, which is ISS is going to be the last government, that means there has to be a commercially led, commercially driven platform. Government can be a customer, but it has to be a commercial platform there so that we can use it. But more importantly, we need other customers to use it as well, because if we're the only store in the mall, we pay all the overhead of that mall, and that's not sustainable. That's like buying another ISS, and that's not going to happen. So what have we done? What has been our approach? A lot of it you've heard right here. We've enabled these, we call them commercial service providers, because they own their own hardware. And they're marketing it, which is important because it's going to customer bases that's beyond selling to the government. Bobby asked, what's commercialization? Commercialization to us is setting our requirements, not design solutions, but setting our requirements, and then let the commercial sector provide the solutions, provide the services, and sell services to us, but we're not going to be able to close their business case. Jeff will tell you right off the bat that we're not the majority of his customer base, and that's good. We want to see that diversification of use of the ISS because that drives the next platform. And so we've got about 8 or 10 companies now that we have got contracts with that are either operating their own hardware on ISS or in development to do so, which is good. And it's across a diverse facility base. They're new capability for us. They filled gaps in our capabilities that were originally designed 20 years ago. So it was important to upgrade, and we did that not buying hardware. We did that buying services. So we've got a number of companies that are operating or will be operating on ISS. But the demand still requires a lot of subsidy. CASIS has done a lot of work over 6 or 7 years going to the non-traditional users, having to educate them, and then in many cases, we still provide the implementation partner cost that translates their investigations into a microgravity investigation. NASA pays those costs because we want them to see the benefit of doing it, so ultimately they will pick up the cost. And they're not even coming close to paying for the subsidies of upmass, of crew time, onboard accommodations, power data, all of that. So it became clear to us this past year that we've got to change our focus a little bit. We've got a lot of good facilities on board now, but we haven't done enough to do direct, sustainable, scalable demand stimulation. And so we started looking at what our options were, and our SBIRO program is very robust, and we use it very heavily in the ISS program. We take a lot of things that are developed under the first phases of that program, and then we take them to flight. And that's good for the SBIR program, it's good for the small companies. What we need is a scalable demand, and that probably means in-space manufacturing. And that can be exotic fibers, it can be cell line manufacturing for research, it can be bioprinting, tissue growth, a number of things and things we probably don't even know of. So we started pivoting to take a little bit of money we put together to help a handful of these come out of the SBIR program and get to a flight demonstration. And if any of those are successful, it's the rising tide that will lift all boats. It will provide a shared overhead for these guys to continue on the next gen platform. It'll make NASA not be the only customer. So the economy has two sides to it, right? We've got the supply, and we're pivoting now to work on the demand. So, Bobby, I think I'll leave it right there.
Sounds very good. Again, thank the panel for what you guys are doing in discussions. And now I'd like to open it up to the audience for questions and comments. I know you guys have been thinking about your questions, so I want to kind of reach out and get some of the questions we have from the audience.
Somebody besides Frank.
All right, should have known this one was coming. Frank Slazer with the Aerospace Industries Association. Just question, obviously there was an initiative this year by the administration to say we're going to stop doing ISS beyond 2025 as a government enterprise. Do you believe that it's possible for the station to be a commercially supported enterprise by that time, principally commercially supported enterprise by that time? And if not, when do you think it could be? Or do you think it can be?
Well, I got the nod from Bobby, so I guess I get to field that one. Space Station was set up as a government program. It was set up to be viable politically. It was set up to be viable internationally. It was not set up to be run efficiently for a profit. Are there elements of it that could be spun off and operated commercially that make sense? Probably. We would have to go through probably another round of announcements to go see if there was interest in even doing that. But taking what was a government program and turning it into a profitable corporate venture is probably not likely. We looked at doing that with the shuttle in the mid-90s. It was equally non-viable for very similar reasons.
Yeah, Frank, if I can just sort of push back just a little bit. I think what the administration announced was at 2024, 2025, seeking to change the relationship between industry and the government in terms of NASA. I don't believe they announced that we're going to end the space station or, it was more, let's look at changing the relationship. Maybe, and I'm speaking here for others, but maybe the government pays the cargo ships directly, or maybe it's just changing the relationship rather than having NASA being the sole procurement, for lack of a better. So I was actually fairly encouraged. I mean, now there's been this whole political thing. No, we're going to keep the station to 2028. Fine. I mean, that's wonderful. I've never been one to see us deorbit and waste hardware that's in space. That's precious enough. But what excited me about what the Space Council announced was they were saying 4, 5, 6 years ahead of time, let's look at changing the relationship, what works. So that actually I found to be interesting and refreshing.
Very good. Questions? More questions?
Yeah, this question is for Mike, but I have a feeling several of you are going to want to pitch in your thoughts on this. So, Mike, you were saying that the ISS is going to be the last government-funded platform in low Earth orbit, and yet we're always going to need a platform in low Earth orbit. Part of what has made commercial opportunities on ISS attractive is that so much of the infrastructure is already there. Jeff didn't have to fund the assembly and fabrication of the ISS from scratch. He was able to jump into a facility that's already there. So when you think about a commercial platform in LEO, how are you going to get a commercial enterprise to pay those from scratch costs that will make it possible for them to have something that we could buy as customer?
Well, I think we've shown how to do it with the commercial cargo and the commercial crew programs. We had several phases of those where we got more comfortable with their design solutions, their integration processes, and there was drops of money to help them during the development. It wasn't that they had to fund it from scratch. And then we ultimately signed service contracts with them to use the vehicles for crew or cargo transportation. So I could see something like that, modified however it needed to be to fit a platform. But there's no question about it. The government is going to be, at least initially, the largest customer. We're not going to do it if we believe that we're going to be the only customer. I mean, I just don't see that being sustainable financially. But I can see us being that early adopter where we put money in, because that's what the government does. We do things that are inherently governmental that the private sector just can't step up to do. So I think there's things that we've done that probably lend themselves to being adapted for a next-gen platform.
Very good. We got one more question here while he's making his way over. Mark, I would like to pull on you for a second also while we get this next question queued up. You talked about a 12-month turnaround for customers. Is that like a high water mark, a low water mark? Is it going to get better than that? Because I think that's going to be key for commercialization too, right? Turnaround time?
Yeah, definitely. Turnaround time is vital. It's not just in this industry, but in other ones as well, especially people doing research and PhDs. You want to have a very quick turnaround time. So I think that's the target at the moment. I'd say we're probably likely 18 to 12 months, something like that. But we think it's certainly possible. And I just want to say a bit about what Mike was talking about. I think we need the government as an anchor tenant, essentially, for a lot of these services, not getting out completely. It's a similar model we've had in, our Paradigm commercial satellites, where we sell the capacity to Ministry of Defense or whatever, and then we can use that spare capacity elsewhere to bring new business. Okay, thanks.
I'll just add too, that's where our line is. If we can get under 12 months, we feel like there's a lot more capabilities and opportunities to get payloads up there. I mean, we're 18 to 24, but that is the line.
All right, so not in any rush to get rid of the space station, but since the topic was broached of what comes next, we've already found that we can make smaller satellites. We don't need the larger ones anymore. So barring the human factors concerns of how big the space station should be, whatever comes next, should it be something smaller than the International Space Station, or maybe we should even have multiple smaller stations?
As Mike said, a great question. As Mike said, this ISS was designed by governments for governments. You'll never have a space station in LEO again like the ISS, nor should there be. Having the modules attached together doesn't make sense when you have some markets that will be for, robotic and some are for human. We know we never want that again, but it was politically made sense. And also you touched at the end on the perfect point. We are doomed if there's one commercial platform that follows ISS. The paradox is we need 6, 8, 10. Why? 1, you need an ecosystem. 2, you need to attack different niches. 3, you need to be in different orbits and inclinations. So at NanoRacks, we may be interested in, permit me to call it unmanned platform to do in-space manufacturing, and maybe Airbus or Teledyne Brown or Bigelow or Boeing in the future want to have a space hotel. Well, you don't want to attach those together, but you want to use the ecosystem we've developed in partnership with NASA and the cargo and develop a new ecosystem on return vehicles. It doesn't make sense for one platform, and you don't want a whole bunch jumbled together. You want an ecosystem.
Alan, we have one here.
Okay. Ron Burke with the Aerospace Corporation. Thank you, Jeff. Following up on the point about ecosystems, it would be valuable to hear from the panel what the top 5 or so major components or elements that you see as being necessary to have a robust ecosystem that is sustainable.
Thanks, Ron. It's like the 10 most on late night television, right? Okay, so well, for number one, for us to have an ecosystem that we're looking at, you need all the components. And I don't know if I can do 5 right now, but first off, we really need a return vehicle. We need something smaller. Dragon is fantastic, but we really need something smaller, automated to return, and even small in Dream Chaser. Dream Chaser is great. That's good. It's wonderful. But actually, as you look out at different platforms and different orbits, you need some small, very low cost return vehicles. That's really critical for the ecosystem to develop. You need, as Mark said, standardized hardware. You need the ability, like on our Bishop Airlock, we have some common interfaces with your platform. That's not a coincidence. Will we work together? Let's hope so. But we've designed the ability to have the interoperability to work together. Another part of the ecosystem is government as customer. I don't know if that's, again, not anchor tenant for us, but government as customer. And then also you get into things like insurance, risk mitigation, greater sophistication of the private sector to provide the liquidity. Also, end some of the protectionism that exists in our industry. I'd like to bid on a JAXA program. And why can't Japanese companies, in the right sense, bid on a NASA program? This is one of the last great protectionist markets that exists. And how can we work together to allow the private sector to begin to bid and work with the different foreign space agencies? So for us, an ecosystem is not just hardware. It's capital, sophisticated capital, risk mitigation, and different components of. One other thing is that to allow the IGA, let me just put, part of the ecosystem is to allow the Intergovernmental Agency Agreement, which is the rules of conduct on the station, to continue and to grow and to include the commercial platforms. It's been a very important part of how we can all do business. It waives third-party liability and a whole bunch of other nifty good stuff.
Chime in. Good. Good. Okay. Go ahead.
It's getting more difficult to have ideas after all those, but I would agree download of small payloads is an excellent idea. I would tend to agree with that. In fact, I'll dig out an old study we did 10 years ago and revive it. The other thing, I think the IGA is very important source of the basis for our cooperation on Orion, and it took a lot of work to do. So, yeah.
You're using it on Orion?
Yeah, it's a subset of that, basically. So it's, yeah.
All right, very good. While we're queuing up the next question, I was thinking on the Dream Chaser. Lee, was there any interesting or out of ordinary type questions you guys received or had concerning with that capability you discussed?
Yeah, so it was very interesting starting this whole concept, and everybody that's involved. I think I listed probably 20 different entities, but air traffic control. We had to talk to the different airports. So we went from Memphis to Birmingham to Nashville to Atlanta. So Atlanta air traffic control had a concern. They wanted to know, just to be clear, how many Dream Chaser landings there would be each day.
Very good.
Yeah.
So what's the answer?
So it was, multiple we hoped for, but if we got one a year, we would be very happy.
All right. Hey, guys, I really appreciate that. Again, to get ready for these panel discussions, the panel members, they put in a lot of prep time, pull together information. We spend time talking as a committee to try to organize what's the best way to present that information to you. So with that, can you give these panel members a warm applause for the all hard work that they did? So we really appreciate them. Really, really appreciate them. All right, I'll turn it back over to Chris.
All right, thank you very much. Great panel, and as you guys are making your way over and we're converting to the next panel, which is a commercial space outlook, a little bit further away from the space station, let me just offer a little bit of a challenge to the audience here. We'll try to do it as a little bit of a feed-through loop. If you're in the center, you're fine. If you are not in the center and you're looking to your right and your left and you see a blue chair, you can move over one. And if you do that again and you need the feedback loop, move over again. So that would move some people towards the middle, leave the ends open a little bit. If you don't mind, I know some of you staked out those aisle seats because they're very, very valuable. But if you would move to the side, I know that we're going to have a good many people coming in, and the back of the room is full of standing room only. So thank you very much for cooperating. And anybody needs any honey roasted peanuts or pretzels, right here.
Video? Absolutely. Yep, it's all good. Thanks.
You got 30 seconds.
You ready?
I've got one more table to get out.
Oh, gotcha. I'll get it.
Okay, for those that I scared out of their seats, you can ask them to come back in. They don't have to sit in the middle. I do want to introduce our next moderator, Mr. Mike Gold. Mike scared me to death when I didn't see him this morning, but he actually told me he was here. He was making his way over. Mike Gold serves dual roles for Maxar as the Vice President for Regulatory and Policy and General Counsel for the company's Radiant Solutions business unit. And as Jeff Mamber says, he does a lot of other stuff, and it just solves all the problems. But one of the reasons that he does solve the problems is that he was appointed to COMSTAC, the FAA Office of Commercial Space Transportation Federal Advisory Committee in 2008, became the chair in 2012. And I think recently, Mike, you've been added to the NASA Advisory Committee, the chair of the Regulatory and Policy Subcommittee. So quite a mouthful and quite a bunch of roles for you, Mr. Gold.
All of which unpaid. I can't get enough of it. So.
Oh, well, that's good. That's good. Well, I want to turn it over to Mike, and you introduce your panel, and thank you very much for coming.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much. So if I can pull up my presentation here. Let me apologize in advance to the panel, to the audience. I've got about an hour and 45 minutes of sleep because I was at Game 1 of the World Series. Reason I was there was I made the mistake back in March at spring training of telling my 10-year-old that if the Sox make it to the World Series, we're going to Game 1. Usually you only have to honor that commitment about once every 86 years, so I thought the odds were in my favor. However, Sox had different ideas, so I flew my father in from Montana, and my son and I flew up from D.C., and we just had 3 generations of Red Sox fans together for what was an extremely special time. And John, kick me if I start to nod off here, but you got it. You know, we had an absolutely wonderful time as a show in there. Only disappointment for my son was he didn't get a chance to pitch. Frankly, I've got more faith in him than some of the Red Sox pitchers. Absolutely. It looked good last night, but we'll see tonight. And we paid the price at the end here. But the reason I bring up baseball is I think it's an apt analogy. You know, back in baseball, which is a sport run on tradition, orthodoxy, we were set in our ways, had certain statistics and information that we paid attention to. And some people will tell you a lot of the time we were governed by superstition or intuition and figures that we shouldn't have been depending upon. Well, back in the day, we decided to start using math for the first time in baseball. Now it's all about numbers, even artificial intelligence. And we're doing things in a very, very different way. And that has been challenging for the existing, baseball organizations, for the people in the organizations. The change has been difficult, although I think ultimately good for everyone. Sometimes we think change may have gone a little too far, and we had to swing back a little bit too. And finding that middle ground paradigm, I think, is important. And that's why I think there's such a great analogy between what's happened in baseball and what's happening in commercial space today. Because that's many, I think, of the same effects that we're seeing, which is why I'm so proud to be here and happy to have such a wonderful panel to talk about the outlook about what is coming next. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, John Elbon. John Elbon is the COO for United Launch Alliance and is responsible for the operation of the Atlas, the Delta, and the Vulcan Centaur launch vehicle programs, including design, engineering, integration, production, quality assurance, program management. He joined ULA after a 35-year career at Boeing with roles such as VP of Space Exploration, Vice President of Commercial Programs, Vice President of Systems Integration for the Army's Future Combat Systems, as the Boeing Program Manager for several NASA programs, including Constellation, ISS, the Checkout Assembly and Payload Processing Contract, Kennedy Space Center. Everyone, let's have a warm round of applause for John Elbon.
Thanks, Mike. You got through that with only an hour and 45 minutes sleep. How many people here from Houston? A few. Oh, there's one. So I'm not, maybe the LC.
You may be outnumbered, yeah.
I don't know.
As long as we beat the Yankees, I'm fine with Houston, fine with Dodgers, so bless you, Houston.
You did get the coach from Houston.
We did. We only hire coaches who know how to beat the Yankees in their own team.
Yeah, and their own team. It's good. Hey, well, thanks for the opportunity to talk today. I got a few charts to kind of show the status of Vulcan and its development, but before I do that, I wanted just to talk a little bit about perspective on commercial launch, which is the part of commercial that I'm involved in. I think it's important, so perspective's driven by past experience, right? And I think it's important for us to look at past experience, particularly in commercial launch, as we have this dialogue. So if you rewind the clock 20 years, there were folks on a panel like this having dialogue about commercial launch, and there were envisioned several constellations that were going to require significant commercial launch. Lockheed Martin and Boeing set out to develop launch vehicles, the Atlas V and the Delta IV, that were focused on that very robust commercial market. In the case of McDonnell Douglas at the time, which later became Boeing, the factory in Decatur was built. It was sized to crank out 40 cores a year. A couple of ships were bought to transport those around. Launch pads were built on the East Coast and West Coast. Significant infrastructure put in place to address that envisioned launch market. Similar similar investment by Lockheed Martin. And then the idea was that, supported by that commercial launch market, kind of as an adjacency to that, we would launch national security payloads and service the government as a customer, the way Jeff Mamber put it, which I agree with, by the way. And then, so that didn't materialize, the commercial market. And these two infrastructures of Boeing and Lockheed were left without enough launch business to support them in a commercial way. And ULA was formed so that we could make sure that we addressed the needs of the national security launch market and that our country would be safe. So it's really important as we have this dialogue that we keep that in perspective, I believe. The way that ULA looks at this market is, as we develop Vulcan, we are sizing the system to be able to operate kind of at the launch rate where we are today, 9 or 10 a year, predominantly government as customer kinds of launches, and supplement that with some commercial crew, commercial cargo launches, and some number of commercial satellite launches, relatively small in comparison to the others. And then if the commercial market does develop and there's an increase for launch, we're putting in the capability so that we can grow and take advantage of that. But I think it's really important to our country and its future that we keep that in perspective and that we don't move into a scenario for the launch market where it's dependent upon a very robust commercial launch market to support a national security launch market. So that's a perspective. It's a perspective that we have at ULA, and it's based on the experience that we've been through in the past. Okay, so now I wanted to tell you a little bit about Vulcan and where it's going and how we're doing that. How do I change slides? Great, thanks. Okay, so I really hesitate to show this chart, to be honest with you. 131 in a row is an incredible number, you know, and I can tell you coming in as the COO after 128, and I walk down a hall every day that has pictures on the sides of the hallway of these 128, and then thinking, okay, I got to be responsible for this going forward. I mean, it's really an awing responsibility. But that is incredible. There's not a system in the world that's done that, and so our opportunity and our mandate is to keep that going forward. So how we're going to do that is we need to capture the attitude, the processes, the approaches that enable that kind of performance, and take that and put it into a new rocket, the Vulcan rocket, that can maintain that kind of performance and at the same time lower costs so that we can be competitive in the market that exists today. Vulcan is based on the heritage of Atlas and Delta, the boosters. I'll start with the boosters. The GEM 63s that are going to assist the boost are going to be developed first used on Atlas. Northrop Grumman's developing those new boosters today, and then they'll migrate to Vulcan. The avionics that will be a part of Vulcan are flying on both Atlas and Delta today, so those exist. The upper stage will be derived from the Centaur upper stage that flies today. We call it a wide-body Centaur. The current one is about 10 feet in diameter. The new Centaur will be about 15 feet in diameter. But it's the same kind of construction, the same heritage in the engine and the avionics. The RL-10s from Aerojet Rocketdyne will be used. And then the new part will be the new engine being developed by Blue Origin, which will be a methane oxygen engine that will perform for the booster. So a lot of heritage there and some new development as well going forward. Making good progress. This is a picture of the tooling out at Decatur. If you get a chance to go on the tour on Friday, you'll see this. Very modern robotic friction stir welding that'll help us reduce the cost as we produce this. And the capacity will be able to go up to 20 Vulcans a year. As I said, we're kind of sizing the business for what our manifest looks like today. Several strategic partners in this with us. I mentioned Northrop Grumman and the new boosters that are being developed. They will fly first on Atlas, and that will happen about a year from now is the first flight that those boosters will fly, and then they'll migrate to Vulcan. And then RUAG is working with us to build fairings. Those will fly on Atlas first as well, and then will fly on Vulcan. They're being built in a section of the factory out in Decatur also. Lots of pad modifications underway. Vulcan will fly off the same pad that Atlas does at the Cape, and it will be modified so that it can handle both as we do the transition. And so the team is doing a really good job of making those mods in and amongst the current Atlas launches. It's kind of exciting to watch. Just from a performance perspective, so this is a key thing about Vulcan. If you look at the first rocket shown there, its performance is very similar to the Atlas, the biggest of the Atlas Vs, which is shown clear on the other side of the page. But then as we add solid boosters to Vulcan, and eventually get to the center rocket there, which is the Vulcan Centaur Heavy, which has a larger Centaur 5 stage and improved RL-10 engines, we'll have performance that surpasses the Delta IV Heavy performance today with a single stick rocket. And so you can imagine that helps quite a bit with the cost as we move forward. So we're making good progress on the development. Our first flight will be, certification flights are targeted for April of '21, and we were real excited about the results of the Air Force's LSA procurement, and we're off and marching. And as I said, our whole mission is to transfer that kind of reliability that we've shown with Atlas and Delta into a new rocket that can also help us control cost. So thanks a lot, and I'll pass it to you, Peter. Oh, Peter's over there. Pass it to Lars.
Hey, John. You know, we mentioned the free work on the advisory committees, and that is what it is, which is why I really appreciate the role that ULA has played on the ComStack through the years, and your predecessor, and generally, you know, not only what you've done technically, but the team in Washington. I know I see Andy over there, and Mark Vazena. Again, it's been really helpful. And also, over in SpaceX, Tim Hughes, who's a important member of the ComStack, has always been there for us. So let's introduce Lars Hoffman. Lars is SpaceX's Senior Director of Government Sales. In this role, he leads strategy, business development, and sales for national security programs to provide critical space-based capabilities. Lars was instrumental to SpaceX earning national security certification for the Falcon 9, the Falcon Heavy launch systems, and has captured government contracts totaling more than $600 million. Lars joined SpaceX in 2014 after a distinguished career in the United States Air Force, including 2 tours in the Pentagon. Lars holds advanced engineering degrees from the U.S. Air Force Academy, the Air Force Institute of Technology, United States Air Force Test Pilot School. Let's have a warm round of applause and welcome Lars.
Thanks. It's great to be back again this year. I was here last year and really enjoyed the symposium, and it's always great to come back to this area. I remember visiting Huntsville growing up and coming by and seeing the Space Camp and Rocket Center, and driving by the Saturn V on display out there always kind of gets you excited all over again about what's going on around here. So it's great to be back in this area. It's a beautiful setting, beautiful facility. So thank you all for inviting us back and getting on a panel this year. This is fantastic. I think we have a video we sent out. I hope it got queued up. I don't know if it is or not. How do we do that? Just go to the next. There we go. So we're headquartered in Hawthorne, which is near Hollywood, so they like to make videos, and they like us to show videos. So here's your video. I hope you like it. This is our Falcon Heavy demo launch back in February 6th, out of Launch Complex 39A. Of course, that's hollowed ground. That's where many of the Apollo launches happened, including Apollo 11, and then later on in the shuttle era, 80 launches from this same location. We took it over in 2014 under a 20-year lease and have refurbed and upgraded as necessary to be able to launch both Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy from 39A. That was our payload on that particular flight. It's on its way out into deep space on a heliocentric orbit. We may see it sometime in the far future. This is our cargo Dragon capsule that flies resupply missions to the International Space Station. We do about 2 or 3 of those a year. We've done 15 so far, and we've got another one coming up here within the next 2 months. That's the interior of our commercial Crew Dragon, the Crew Dragon, and the spacesuits that we've designed and manufactured as well. And there's BFR, Big Falcon Rocket, BFR, Big Falcon Rocket. And that's our vehicle that's going to be able to do pretty much anything that we need it to do in terms of delivering payloads to Earth orbits and then far beyond Earth orbits, going to the moon, delivering cargo to the moon, delivering cargo and people to Mars to help us along our strategic goals of making humanity multiplanetary. So what's going on at SpaceX today? There's just a few things, and I'll try and summarize those quickly. I don't have any slides. The video was meant to give you a quick overview. But we're launching like crazy. We've launched 35 times since last January of 17. We launched 18 times in 2017 and 17 times so far this year, with another 5 launches scheduled between now and the end of the year. So do your math. That's a couple in November and a couple in December. It's going to be a busy finish to the year. But all of those are well on track for launch. And it's a cross-section across multiple markets. It's not just government launches, it's not just commercial launches, it's across the spectrum. Commercial launches for government or for customers around the world, both US customers and international customers. We've got multi-payload launches, a couple coming up here, including one at the end of November. That's over 60 payloads. That's going to be an exciting one to watch. And we've got cargo resupply services. We've got an Iridium launch planned towards the end of the year. That will be the 8th launch in the Iridium series of launches to put up the last 10 Iridium satellites to fill out their constellation of 75. So that's just what's going on with Falcon 9 between now and the end of the year. Falcon Heavy is teed up for a couple more launches coming up in 2019, both commercial and government launches. Those should be very exciting to watch coming up in the spring of 19. But the top priority in the company right now is focusing on commercial crew, the commercial crew program, and making sure that we stay on track. And as you saw just a few weeks ago with the in-flight aboard of the Soyuz, we need to have this capability. We need to get our astronauts up to space from US soil. So we're working as hard as we can around the clock to stay on track. We're working very closely with NASA every day, and we're right on schedule here to do the first demo launch in the next 2 months to be able to deliver an uncrewed Crew Dragon up into its intended orbit, bring it back down safely, and learn everything we can to quickly move on to the in-flight aboard and then on to the first crewed mission in the spring, and then start doing the crew resupply missions here in 2019. So we're very excited on that program and very focused on that program. I'm happy to entertain any questions along those lines as well as we get further along. And then looking further forward here, we can talk about BFR a little bit if you'd like. It's being built right now. We've been doing testing on the Raptor engine for the last couple of years. It's been a very successful partnership with the Air Force. This is a LOX methane full flow stage combustion engine. It is absolute state of the art, a lot of additive manufacturing, and it's exceeding all expectations. We're going to integrate that with the upper stage of the BFR next year to do hop tests from our South Texas launch site. So that's coming up next year as well. If you think that that's far off, it's not. It's right around the corner. So very excited about all of the things going on at SpaceX today in terms of commercializing. Commercial market is one of our key markets, as is the government market. So we're kind of spread across the portfolio there, across the various markets. Happy to talk about that as well. But I'll cede my time now, and we'll finish our opening remarks so we can get to the questions, because I think that's the entertaining part.
Great. Thank you so much, Lars. Bottom line takeaway there, LA, good at videos, good at rockets, you've done a bunch of SSL, not so great at baseball. So appreciate that. Next up, we have Peter McGrath, who's the Global Sales Marketing Director for the Space Exploration Business and Space Launch, part of Boeing Defense, Space and Security. He's responsible for shaping, extending, capturing business in support of human space exploration missions. Peter has been with Boeing for more than 29 years, working in various positions, starting as a structural engineer on Space Station, DCXA, Delta IV, sales for Delta II, Delta IV, and Sea Launch sales and marketing for Air Force satellite programs. Program manager responsible for fielding the first set of brigades under the Army's Brigade Combat Team Modernization Program. Peter is a bachelor's in aerospace engineering from University of Southern California, master in aerospace composites from California State University, Long Beach, MBA from University of Southern California. And let me say a special thank you to Boeing, because without you, I wouldn't have gone to Boston. I wouldn't be here today. So go ahead, Peter. Let's have a round of applause for Peter.
So yeah, Mike's outnumbered on the panel today. A lot of people here
Yeah,
from
a lot of
LA. But I'll start today with a little background. I'll talk a little bit like John did about history, because history really defines things. And the way I always like to look at it is history. If you go back to aircraft, it's a great example of how things started out as very governmental and kind of transitioned into more of a commercial environment. So I give you two spectrums here. This is the Boeing barn from the original days in, I'm looking for the actual date they gave me, but it was in it was about over 100 years ago now. And on the right side, on your left side, is the commercial crew processing facility. So if you think about it, the red barn on the right was when we started aviation, and the barn on the left is where we're going to start commercial crew flights here soon. So it really puts in perspective, we're kind of at that same forefront as we were back about 100 years ago on aviation. And for that reason, and it didn't animate, so you're not going to see it here, I had a nice little dot, which was Kitty Hawk. And if you looked at the first contract Boeing actually had, it was to fly cargo from San Francisco to Chicago, or mail. And then you take that and you look at what's flying today, and actually the track today would say that roughly about 9,700 planes are in the air at any given time, which is roughly about 1.3 million people. So we went from basically one person flying for a total of 100 feet to, within 100 years, we've got millions of people flying every minute. So it's a pretty impressive thing when you think about how we've transitioned through aviation. If you look at space, I think we're really on the cusp of the same type transformation. So as was stated before, we're very actively working on commercial crew. These are some pictures. I think Jody called it at lunch, your kids' pictures, the photo album. But these are some of our active pictures. If you go down and look at C3PF, or our commercial crew and cargo processing facility down at KSC, the top picture is our crew module for flight. The bottom one below that is the service module. We've actually have 3 crew modules in production in various phases, several in testing now, and we're getting ready to bring our uncrewed test flight one out of the chamber out at the KSC shortly here. And then the service module, we've got various versions in production now. That's one that we do build for every flight. And we've got that in various levels of testing today, as well as the flight units in production. The other things I wanted to show, though, is it's more than just the capsule and the service module. It has to do with a lot of other activities. We've been doing a lot of work around mission control and developing the mission control capabilities. You see the abort system at the Atlas facility out there, or not the abort system, but the escape system, which is a nice zip line wire system that we've tested out that allows the astronauts to get off the pad in case of anomaly. We've done various parachute tests. We still have a couple more to go. Doing a lot of human factors and crew integration work, which you see on the top left. And then, of course, the crew training is underway for the entire crew, including, I think that's a picture there of Chris Ferguson in the water. And then on the bottom left is our recovery training. We've actually been out at White Sands practicing our recovery system, because we will land on airbags out at White Sands. So a lot of progress. As was mentioned recently, a couple of shifts in the dates. If you ask our program manager what our focus is, he said we will fly when we are safe to fly. He has a lot of history working on shuttle and other programs, and he knows what it means to take humans to space. And so we're currently targeting an orbital test flight around March of next year. Our pad abort test will be in April. The crewed flight test, which includes Chris Ferguson and our 2 NASA astronauts, will be in August of next year. And then we are actively working today to fill a potential 5th seat on future flights with commercial passengers. So the other thing I did want to talk about, and I know this was talked on the last panel, but Mike said I should talk a little bit about ISS commercialization as well. There's a lot of conversation, so I'll add on to what was said on the last panel. There's 2 types of economies you can talk about. Economies that actually happen up on space station, which was things like Jeff Mamber was talking about. And I can also add Made in Space is probably an opportunity to talk about that too, because they're doing a lot of things around 3D printing that we do up on space station today. But something unique they did, if you haven't heard of Z-Bland, they've been looking at pulling fiber optic in space, and they seem to think that the physics says that if you pull it in 0G, you remove the crystallization as you pull it. So it's a much better fiber, and it may have applications here on Earth. Now, so the question here is, am I generating income in space, or am I generating income on Earth, but I'm doing it with a research lab in space? So I would argue there's a lot of benefit of the space station in a national lab aspect that we don't account for in the economics when we have conversations about space economy. And some of the things that Jeff, or not, some of the things Jeff is looking at is going to generate things in space, but some of the things that Made in Space is doing is going to generate an economy here on Earth. And there's other examples of that. Another great one is Amgen, who's done research on osteoporosis and has used accelerated learning because you have accelerated bone loss on orbit. They've used that to accelerate their testing and actually bring drugs to market that generate about $1 billion a year. So when you look at it, there's a lot of economy coming off of space station, whether you say it's in LEO or whether it's on Earth. And so we have to look at it from both perspectives. And I was going to conclude with this chart to talk a little bit more than just low Earth orbit activities. There's a lot of talk about additional destinations, LEO, but we've been talking a lot lately about the Gateway and our path to Mars, or to the Moon and Mars. And when we talk about Gateway, it's really, there's been some debate about whether you should have one or not. I would argue if you don't have it, you don't have a sustainable path forward. What you have is a path to the Moon. And if we want to go to Mars, we need something that really is a stepping stone to get to Mars and something that allows us to go to the Moon as well. It also opens up opportunities for international partnership, but it also opens up a lot of opportunities for commercial partnerships. You know, when you look at how we're going to fill logistics and how we're going to deal with potential commercial landers that are going to go to the Moon, you can bring samples back to the Gateway, which makes the missions a lot more simplified and a lot less risk for the commercial partners. And you can bring them back then via Orion or through other systems back to Earth. So there's a lot of things that you can do commercially that can be leveraged through the Gateway. So I'll stop there as well and then be open to questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Peter. Next up, John Steinmeier, who's currently Director of Space Launch Business Development for Northrop Grumman Innovative Systems Launch Vehicle Division. This capacity, he leads space launch business development activities, including marketing, sales of Pegasus, Minotaur, Antares, and the new Omega-A launch services. John has over 30 years of experience in the launch vehicle industry and is a Boeing employee, supported the Titan IV, Delta II, III, and IV, Japanese H-2A, and Sea Launch programs before coming to then Orbital Sciences Corporation. John has a Bachelor's of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering from UC San Diego, an MBA with an emphasis on international business from the University of Southern California. Here we go again, Southern California Marshall School.
You didn't really stack this panel.
No, not at all. There's AAS. What can I tell you? Dr. Jim.
All right, thanks, Mike. Thanks to AAS.
Let's have a round of applause for John.
Oh.
Thank you, John.
Well, thanks, Mike. Thanks to AAS for the opportunity to be here today. And I just want to share a few points on a perspective in commercial space. Commercial space is a broad term, and the space industry, the nature of commercial space, as others have alluded to, has evolved dramatically over time. From the launch of the early commercial satellites, to the first privately funded and commercial space vehicles, to dedicated commercial launch entities, to commercial government partnerships. And it continues to evolve today. Northrop Grumman, myself, others on this panel, many of you in the audience have played roles in that, and we're very proud at Northrop Grumman of the role that we played and continue to play in the evolution of commercial space. The other point I'd like to make is that government and commercial, especially in the space industry, are symbiotic. The government experience that we have permeates throughout our whole company. The government experience has facilitated development and successful flight demonstration of many of the components that we integrate into our now commercial launch systems. And you saw that in some of the slides that Charlie Precourt shared with you this morning, and the common hardware that we use across both government and commercial systems. Moreover, the significant synergy that we have between our government and commercial programs allows significant economies of scale, bringing lower cost across our product line. At Northrop Grumman, we have 4 active launch vehicle programs. We have the Pegasus air-launched program, currently still the only Class 3 NASA-certified small launch vehicle. We have our very successful Minotaur program that we operate cooperatively with the U.S. Air Force, 100% success, tailored government launch solutions. We also have our Minotaur commercial variant that offers affordable commercial small launch. And then we have our Antares launch system, which I'll talk a little bit more in detail in a moment, primarily supporting International Space Station cargo resupply, but also available to other markets. For the past several years, we've been active in the development of the Omega launch system. As others have alluded to, the initial development was performed under a cooperative agreement with the U.S. Air Force to develop propulsion prototypes, which we have done, and we will successfully test fire next year. Like Mr. Elbon alluded to, we're very proud of the recent LSA award that we also received from the Air Force. Our Northrop Grumman Air Force, our space launch programs serve all markets, the government, DoD, NASA, as well as commercial entities. So just one prime example of a successful NASA commercial partnership, the initial COTS program and then the CRS program that provides cargo resupply services to the International Space Station, and specifically our Antares and Cygnus launch vehicles and space vehicles that supports that. To date, we have successfully delivered more than 50,000 pounds of cargo to the International Space Station. We have another roughly 7,000 pounds being packed today to be launched the middle of next month. Our solution provides an optimized volume to NASA to allow them greater utility for delivery on orbit. We've been awarded multiple follow-on missions, and then, of course, the subsequent CRS-2 contract. Want to talk just a little bit about Omega. Omega is our new intermediate to heavy launch system that initially we are developing cooperatively with the U.S. Air Force, but will be designed to serve all markets. The Omega system, just very briefly, is a two-segment solid rocket booster. We call that a Castor 600, which borrows heavily from our vast experience with solid rocket propulsion on the SLS and the precursor shuttle program. The second stage is a single segment Castor 300 solid rocket motor. The upper stage is a cryogenic LOX hydrogen stage powered by two RL-10 C5 engines, and then 5-meter payload accommodations. Had I known this was going to be such a large screen, I would have shown the slide that has a little greater detail, but all these components have a vast heritage from across our extensive product line within Northrop Grumman Innovation Systems. It's highly vertically integrated. The composite components come from our Aerospace Structures division, currently manufactures all the large-scale composite structures for ULA and our other launch vehicles. The propulsion systems, once again, borrow heavily from other heritage systems. The GEM 63XL solid rocket motors, as was alluded to earlier, will initially be used on the Atlas V, and then will be rolled into Omega and other programs. For launch on the East Coast, we have a cooperative agreement with NASA to use much of the infrastructure that you saw earlier today that was originally developed for the shuttle and precursor programs and is now being updated and renovated for SLS. We're taking advantage of that and using High Bay number 2 of the VAB to integrate the vehicle and roll out to Launch Complex 39B on much the same infrastructure you saw earlier, our own dedicated MLP, and then the launch pad there that you saw earlier has been refurbished and is nearly complete. The vehicle is well in development. As I believe Mr. Precourt mentioned earlier today, we have actually 7 common booster segments that are in various stages of production, and we're on track for a static fire test of those motors in the second quarter of next year and initial launch capability of the vehicle in 2021. What's in store for the future? Certainly continued execution of cargo resupply missions, both under the current NASA construct as well as potential future commercialization of the station, as was alluded to just earlier. SLS continued booster production and upgrades, as was alluded to earlier today, and continued support of that program. And then ultimately integrated solutions for Cislunar, Gateway, and other points beyond, combining both the resources of the Greater Northrop Grumman enterprise as well as our own launch vehicles to field integrated solutions for exploration goals in the future. We're tremendously excited about the future, and thank you for the opportunity to speak here today.
Wonderful. So we turn to you, the audience, for questions. Questions from the audience.
That was inevitable.
This question is for Mr. Elbun. You said something that I think was very interesting, and I wanted to see if I could get you to expand upon that a little more. You said that we want to avoid getting into an environment where we have to have a robust commercial launch market in order to sustain the national security launch market. Can you elaborate a little more explicitly what would be the consequences of getting into such an environment?
So I guess I was drawing a parallel to where we were about 15 years ago, where we had the Delta and Atlas rockets that were developed focused on that commercial market, and then when the commercial market didn't materialize, it eroded the business case associated with those two rockets. And so ULA was formed to pull those together so that we could continue to provide that launch capability in an environment that didn't need to be dependent on a commercial market to keep it going. Having that capability to launch our national security assets and the important missions of NASA too is something that we as a country and as our government need to make sure that we sustain. So I think as we look forward, and Mike Reed brought up, he used the magic words in the last panel about supply and demand. And we have to make sure that we don't get too much supply and not enough demand so that the providers can't survive in a robust business environment, and then we lose the capability as a country to do the launches that we need to do. So I think it's important, kind of the framework we're looking is make sure we can survive with the known demand that's in the market, and then if as a commercial demand develops and increases, that can be upside to the business case that we're working. But let's be careful not to put a model in place as a country that is dependent upon that upside materializing to enable the basic capability that's needed for national security and for NASA's missions.
Great.
That's kind of the thought I was after there.
Jeff?
Jeff Fow, Space News. Curious what the panel thinks about commercial opportunities for supporting the Gateway or other NASA activities in cislunar space. I know, for example, there was a recent RFI about Gateway logistics services, and is that something, for example, that could be handled on a commercial basis like ISS commercial cargo versus a standard government contracting method?
So I guess I'll
John,
start.
yeah, you want to kick us off on that one?
Sure, I'll start. I think perhaps the jury's still out on exactly how everything will play out. We are certainly designing our Omega system so we could support such payloads going forward, should that be the ultimate decision. And we would be able to support varieties of configurations, whatever would ultimately be decided on for that particular opportunity.
Peter, any comments there?
Yeah, so I think I kind of mentioned a little bit when I was talking about, and I brought up logistics as a possible commercial opportunity for Gateway. Yeah, I think it's definitely, when you think about the service model, seems to work good as a good entry point in markets that aren't as well defined yet. And you're seeing that kind of proven out in LEO today with Space Station. You got commercial cargo and commercial crew now, where you're leveraging technology that's done from 50, 60 years ago. As we push out deeper into space, it's going to push technology a little bit, but I think most of the logistics technology should be pretty well known. It's mostly launch vehicles and a lot of the capabilities we've been developing on COTS and other systems. So I think that's a very viable opportunity for commercial partnering. There are other things. I mentioned the fact that if you have a gateway, it's a lot easier to do sample return. And if there's commercial opportunities to, like we talk about CLIPS, I think is the latest lander approach that's out there on commercial landers. And I think that probably got talked a little bit this morning. But you know, as you take commercial things to the surface of the moon, if you want to bring anything back, it's going to be a lot easier to bring it back through the gateway than it is to try to bring it all the way home. And that can be a partnership with NASA in the sense that if you bring it to the gateway, they can bring it back in either a cargo vehicle or inside of an Orion. So there's a lot of opportunities, I think, to create partnerships as we look at going out towards the gateway and the moon.
Lars, any comments on gateway?
Sure. Well, in general, SpaceX is all about revolutionizing technology and opening up access to space. And that's not just LEO, that's beyond LEO, cislunar to the moon and to Mars. And so anything that we can do to help foster that, we're looking for opportunities to expand in those areas on our own and in partnership opportunities as well. So we're open to all of those opportunities, and we're definitely on that track to continue opening up access to space, to open up new opportunities and potentially new markets. Right now, we're doing a lot in LEO with cargo resupply back to and from the space station, taking a lot of cargo up and bringing a lot of cargo back, a lot of results of experiments, a lot of critical samples that we're bringing back and returning almost within 24 hours to the customers so that they can take full advantage of the vital experiment and in research that's being done on the space station. So that's an example in LEO that we could see expanding beyond LEO to other locations.
I'd just add one thing to that, Mike. I think there's a role for both government vehicles like SLS and commercial vehicles like the ones we've talked about here relative to the gateway. There are missions where large pieces of the gateway are going to be taken up for assembly, where crew's going to be taken there. They're clearly SLS is focused on SLS and Orion. And then their logistics is the opportunity that's most often discussed as a commercial opportunity, and I think that will make sense as well.
Different tools for different activities.
That's
Next
right.
question.
Yes, Clyde Neal, University of Notre Dame. I think Peter made this comment. If we don't have Gateway, you don't think we'll have Mars or go to Mars. And I'd like you to connect the dots for me because I can't connect that statement. Could you enlighten me on the value of Gateway in terms of going to Mars?
Kind of like our conversation last week, Clyde.
Right, and I'd also like to hear Lars's SpaceX view on that as well.
Sure. So you know, and this was a conversation we had last week in another activity we were in. Yeah, the gateway, or I guess the way to think of it is the architecture should really be defined based on the mission you're after. And if the mission is to get, go plant a flag back on the moon, then direct to the surface might be the solution. Although it's going to limit where you can go, it's going to limit what infrastructure you're going to put in place, and it's going to probably end after 6 or 7 missions, and you're done. There's no, once you get there, what are you going to do? And it creates an environment that probably isn't as sustainable. And so the way, at least I've been thinking of it as others, is if you want something that's sustainable, you need to create an infrastructure or an element that allows you to actually not only get to the surface of the moon in different locations where you can do research and study and give you the flexibility to do that, but it also allows you to demonstrate and prove out capabilities and systems that feed forward to Mars. And if I use the gateway in that capacity, from the gateway I can do a lot of things in the surface of the moon that, like telerobotic operations. I can do sample return like we talked about. I can do reusable landers to the surface of the moon, so I can start putting reusability into the architecture. There's a lot of things I can do there. It also opens up something we didn't talk about last week a little bit, was it also opens up international opportunities, because there's more content that allows the international partners to play that then allows it to be tied a little bit more to policy, which seems to help keep longevity going and keep programs moving forward. But from the gateway, you also can use it as a great proving ground and stepping stone to move on to Mars. So my argument would be, if we're going forward to the moon, we're not supposed to say back to the moon. If we're going forward to the moon, we should be doing it in a way that we're retiring risk and proving out systems that we need to explore further, not just stop at the moon. Lars? I understand. I heard that last week. Yeah, I agree.
Lars, what do you think of stepping stone?
So I talked a moment ago about SpaceX's passion to open up access to space, and that includes low Earth orbit and beyond low Earth orbit. So we're developing BFR, and I talked a little bit about BFR earlier. BFR is being designed, or is designed, to certainly serve as the Earth orbits. We can deliver well over 100 tons to low Earth orbit. We can refuel on orbit and then deliver those 100 tons to other locations like the moon. We can land on the moon, we can deliver cargo, and we can come back from the moon without having to refuel. If we want to go on to Mars, we can deliver cargo to Mars, significant cargo and people to Mars, and then refuel and be able to come back home. So that's our plan, is to expand, opening the pathways to space, both to Earth orbits and beyond, going to the moon and going on to Mars. There's a lot of details in all of those steps along the way, but we're on that path right now. We're building the vehicle today, and we're going to be starting our testing next year, so stay tuned. You'll see the hop test next year, just like you saw us doing hop tests with our Grasshopper booster a few years ago, and now you're seeing us land boosters routinely. We've launched Falcon 9 over 60 times. We've landed our first stage booster 30 times now and relaunched 16 times. We're about to relaunch a booster for the third time, so we're turning this into routine access to space and higher reliability, higher performance, lower cost access to space. That opens it up for everybody, and BFR is just the evolution of that.
Next question.
Thanks. Irene Klotz with Aviation Week. For Mr. Hoffman, SpaceX has been really good at getting NASA contracts and more recently the Air Force in support of the grand vision that the company has, but recently was stymied by not getting an LSA contract. Is that going to affect your timeline or your plans at all for future development, BFR, and other systems?
Yeah, so SpaceX is, just like all of our investments are diversified across multiple investments, we are diversified across multiple markets, commercial, government, and both civil and national security. And we've had, like you point out, a great partnership with NASA. The most visible, really, is the cargo resupply services contracts that we've got out through 2024, and we've got the commercial crew program that's really kicking off. And on the national security side, I've been deeply involved with that since joining SpaceX, gaining certification, gaining that stamp of approval from the national security community to launch their precious payloads. And we've been very successful at winning a number of missions, 7 national security missions so far, 6 of those in the ELV class, and we expect that that partnership with the Air Force will continue into the future. We've been partnered with them over the last 2 years with our Raptor development program. So we've had great success there. We have a great relationship with the Air Force and with NASA, and we look forward to continuing to expand that relationship going forward. Thanks.
So I know we're running out of time, but maybe one more quick question and quick responses.
Hello. So my question deals with the supply and demand that was mentioned before, that we have the supply. What I've heard today is that we are doing a lot of research in the commercialization area to get us to the space station and beyond, to the moon and beyond, and bring them back with the payloads, doing some research in that direction. So I wonder about the commercialization. Somebody talked about the 3D printing being done in the microgravity area. Are we exploring other avenues of commercial use on Earth of some of the things that we can do in space, like the 3D printing? What are some of the research that we need to take in the universities? What are some of the research that is being done in the private sector? What is the research being done into the governmental sector to bring to the commercial use on Earth of something like 3D, but there are other aspects also we can do in the microgravity to decrease the cost, increase the quality, and then bring them back. That will make it viable, the space program, from a commercial point of view. So I would like to know what is being done in that direction.
You want to take that? You want to start out?
Yeah, so you were using 3D printing as an example, because I tend to use biosciences more as an example. But from a 3D printing perspective, the purpose I'm thinking of primarily for 3D printing is I don't have to bring every part with me when I start exploring or doing things. I can actually print the part I need, and once I'm done, I can shave it back down, and I'm back into raw goods that I can reprint for other things. So that means I don't have to bring all the storables with me. It means I can print any part I need, right? So I think of it from that way, from an exploration perspective, and that's where I see the Made in Space 3D printing really helping out. Although they have been looking at 3D printing human organs, which would definitely help us back here on Earth. You know, the idea that in microgravity, you don't have the effect of gravity weighing in as you print it, so you don't have damage as you start putting the system together, stresses in the system. So they've been looking at 3D printing organs. But, you know, the area I think that there's been a lot of benefit is really around the protein crystal, you know, the medical side of it. And John can talk this as well as I can, because we've said it at about 20 conferences. But, you know, like the example we typically use is Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, and a scientist from Japan that took a protein crystal up there and found a water molecule he couldn't see on Earth because the crystal is pure up there and it's not here. And now he's experimenting with drugs that inhibit the effects of Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. And so to me, that's the benefit of doing science up in space that can come back and benefit things on Earth. So if you're asking what can universities and research do to kind of spawn some of that, I think it's looking for opportunities where we can leverage microgravity research. So putting samples and experiments together to go see where we can go leverage that. You know, the printing of organs is a great example. You know, seeing what we're having issues with here on the Earth that we might be able to overcome in microgravity, putting those experiments together, launching them up. Cases will help you put them up on station, and then we can bring the parts back, and you can take a look and see how they're materializing.
John, did you want to make a quick comment?
Yeah, so it's the million-dollar question. I mean, all of us on the stage here are focused on the supply side. You know, Omega, SLS, Falcon, and BFR, Atlas Delta Vulcan. We don't have New Glenn here, but they could be here. You know, so we all are interested in the demand side increasing. Yeah. I'd like to have 4 more people up here in you know, a market that was big enough to keep them all going. So I think the trick is we just got to keep talking and working it. ULA hosts a conference of about 100 different entrepreneurs on a yearly basis, and we just get them in a room. We talk about the cislunar economy and what it could be and try to generate ideas and get demand. We just have to keep doing that. And I'll take one more minute. I don't know how many people have been to Thomas Edison's home in Fort Myers, Florida, but there's 2 kind of researches there that always impress me. One is the light bulb. He purposely tried to build a light bulb. He did tens of thousands of filaments until he found one that would work. And that was very structured research that led to a result. Another one is there's a pile of rubber on the floor in his laboratory that the technician accidentally spilt sulfur into and discovered vulcanization. So we just got to keep doing research, because some things happen just by accident and some things happen by deliberate, you know, I'm trying to find that. And so, you know, keeping that going so we generate an economy in low Earth orbit, in cislunar space, in Mars, is just incredibly important to our path going forward.
So look, John, Jeffrey Manber and Andrew Rush are talking together right now. Hopefully they're cooking up some great ideas for demand. Wonderful. They got us covered. That sounds good. So look, want to thank everybody. I'd like to thank AAS and Jim Way for putting this together, University of Alabama Huntsville for hosting us. Bring it full circle. I started with my family in June. I dropped my son off here in Huntsville for space camp. I hope 8 years from now, maybe I can drop him off for the Space Force Academy here in Huntsville. So let's have a long round of applause for Huntsville and all the folks that are hosting us.
Excellent. All right. Coming up next, we have another VB Extra. This one is with NASA's Thomas Zurbuchen, talking about the intersection of space science and exploration. That will start promptly at 4:15. So we have a quick short break out there. We do have some coffee. So please go amp up and then come back in for Mr. Zurbuchen. Thanks. And thank you to AI Solutions and the Aerospace Company for sponsoring these breaks all day long. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, good. Thank you. All right, it is now 1:15. If you look at your watches, you'll see it says exactly 15 after. We actually heard that a few people needed to go to the bathroom, and it's a long walk, so we took a little extra time. Now, we've been asked to make a special announcement because lots of people are going around going, "Where's Mike? Where's Mike? Where's Mike?" Almost like Car 54, where are you? For those of you older that remember such things. But Mike Griffin was on the program, and then just before we sent it to print, we were on a phone call, and Mike Griffin was at home, and he called in and talked a little bit to us. And Mike got sent to Abu Dhabi by the Secretary of Defense. He had to be there today for a meeting, so he will not be in time to speak tomorrow. Instead, we've got Mitch Nikolic, who is in his office in Washington, and he'll be making that speech for him. But for those of you that are a little disappointed, Mike says he will be back in time for the dinner tomorrow night. So if you are going to the Von Braun dinner, you can certainly go and grab Mike and give him whatever message you want to. I'm sure there'll be lots of people and you can get in line. But now it's time for our VB Extra, our next VB Extra. And today features Thomas Zurbuchen, and he's going to talk about the intersection of space science and exploration. And I have a multi-page, lots of things in it, bio for Dr. Zurbuchen. But I like to relate to my speakers a little bit, as you have noticed. Every once in a while I have an old story about them, but my oldest story about Thomas is about 2 or 3 months old. A couple of months ago, NASA had several industry days that they televised for some of the exploration programs, where they explained what they expected to do in the different lunar programs they're developing. And my memory of those, and at least 2 of them, maybe there were 3, but at least I think in the PPE program and in the Lunar Lander program, and then maybe another one somewhere, they took pains to have the science folks come in and say, this is what we're going to get out of the program. Instead of being just the typical NASA, this is the hardware we're going to build and it's going to be great. It was this is what we're going to get out of it. And Dr. Zurbuchen was the one who came in and said those things, I believe. He's the NASA Associate Administrator for the Science Mission Directorate. He has his PhD and his master's in physics from the University of Bern in Switzerland. He's received a number of honors and 3 NASA Group Achievement Awards. Dr. Zurbuchen, please come and talk to us. Do you have charts?
Yeah, this is good.
That's it.
Thanks, sir. So it's a great honor for me to be here today. I hear there's not many scientists that are usually here. So let me tell you what science is. No, I'm just kidding. What I want to do is really talk to you about our excitement in exploration. And I want to tell you, start with kind of a personal way to talk about this, but also tell you where we are right now as part of the exploration campaign that we put together as an agency in response to the space policy directives that we have, but also then what our vision is going forward. We think what we're really about in science is we're explorers, just like human explorers, and we want to explore as one, in unison, because that's the best way to make progress. That's really what we're about. And it doesn't escape me that right in the front row here are NASA First members. That's a leadership program that it's very competitive. They got in there, and in fact, their project is all about explore as one. So I'm going to steal your thunder, okay? Or borrow it. One of the things I told them is, credit is not a conserved quantity. Everybody can take 100% of credit. So for us, for science, in this anniversary year that we're looking at NASA, for us in science, this is the pivotal picture. It's a picture, of course, that talks about the trifecta of science. In the middle, the guy who barely can reach the rocket is Van Allen, who's a professor in the Midwest somewhere. Pickering, to your right there, is kind of at the nascent JPL. They're really the system engineer who put together Caltech, in fact, the system engineer put together the instrument that, of course, Van Allen built together into a vehicle that was propelled by von Braun, who is over there at the right, the guy with the elastic arms, because he is taller than all the others, right? And so basically, what happened there is really that coming together of the propulsion side, which of course was developed not primarily because of these robotic instruments, but it was a transformative moment for all of us. This is January 31st, 1958, when that rocket took off, and it changed everything, how we look at nature and how we explore nature. Another moment that's just as important is this one, and of course it's an Apollo 11 moment, and it's frankly science hiding in plain sight. That chocolate paper there hanging from the little aluminum pole is an experiment. It's the simplest experiment that I'm aware of. Literally, it is aluminum, very expensive aluminum. And it's standing there. You see the shadow on the ground next to the astronaut. And of course, as the sun is hitting it, what's also hitting is the solar wind. The solar wind is, of course, the expanding atmosphere of the sun. It's so hot in the solar corona that it's not holding back its atmosphere. It's blowing it out supersonically. And with about 400 kilometers per second, these particles hit that surface of that aluminum foil and planet themselves. So many of these particles, they react when they get in there. You know, hydrogen interacts with aluminum or whatever material it is. There's some platinum in there too in that surface. Oxygen does the same. But the noble gases, they implant themselves and they just hang out like little bullets. And so what happened after that walk, the astronauts wrapped it all up, brought it home, and then what you do is you take that foil and put it in the lab and you heat it up. A little bit of temperature, of course, makes the surface stuff come off, and the more you crank up the temperature, all of a sudden those particles at just about a kilo electron volt, that 400 kilometers per second per mass unit, they're coming out like a peak. That was the best measurement of all of noble gases of the sun until 35 years later, where I finally beat the record by building a robotic instrument with a whole group and made measurements that had the same accuracy or better accuracy. That, by far, was one of the most productive experiments that related to the history of the solar system. And it was done right now, right then, by that astronaut standing there. That's what we mean when we talk about Explorers 1. It's that reaching across and locking our arms and doing things that otherwise we cannot do because both of us are there, science and human exploration. What happened later on the robotic side, this is in the late 80s, you see these missions, some of them, it's like, wow, are you kidding me? You know, we were already developing Hubble then, you know, in the late 80s. Hubble, of course, is in the news. It's just fine, you know. Chandra is back in science mode since yesterday. You know, so all these missions are in development. You see a lot of the bold-faced ones. Bold-faced in this code is, you don't have to look at all of them, but you know, bold-faced in this code is under development, whereas the regular fund are the ones that are already flying. And so you see, kind of look at the number, get a sense. This is where we are today, right? And so you see there's a tremendous movement forward of our understanding of the Earth. We're a better Earth today. We're a safer place today because of the work that these pioneers did and the missions that are flying right now, 20 in orbit right now, 19 under development at Earth. We learn about the world around us, whether it's the moon, whether it's Mars. Look at the kind of the tools that we deployed. They're getting ready for human exploration. We never think of Mars exploration independent of human exploration. We always think about what's there to come next, and then you look at the worlds beyond, where in any foreseeable future we're not going to be there, but we will eventually be out there in these other worlds. And of course the space weather missions of the type that I talked to you about, as well as astrophysics, that we're, of course, developing some of the most exciting missions, some of them being really hard, frankly, and we're struggling a little bit, whereas others are out there. One of them, of course, developed right here at Marshall, Ixby. So basically, for me, those are the missions that we're doing. See, just like before, I showed you Explorer 1, then I showed you the one together with human exploration. I want to show this picture. And this, of course, is the space station. Now, for me, to show that chart, I cannot. Every time I show the chart, I think of a seminar that I ran at the University of Michigan. I ran the seminars. That's what the junior faculty does because they're not good at anything else, right? So I ran that seminar, and I invited this guy called Tom Donahue, was the chair of the Space Studies Board, and the title of his talk was How We as Science Failed to Kill Off Space Station. That was the title. and I'm like, wow, that's an exciting talk. You know, so he talked about it. It was a really depressing talk because he failed. Well, I'm so glad he did. Look at all the science that is hanging from the space station. There's a lot of science on the inside. I don't want to talk about that. You already heard others talk about this. That's often in the context of human exploration. There's a lot more attention giving to that. But let's look at the outside of this and the work that relates to the Earth's atmosphere, SAGE 3, for example, Lightning Mapper, which is hanging out there since this year, or also missions that are under development right now, both in astrophysics, in earth science, and also actually in heliophysics. NICER is one of them. NICER is kind of cool because it has two elements, and Jim Reuter is here. I just said hi to him. Hey, Jim. So kind of the one element of it, it's the most advanced experiment to look at a particular set of objects of neutron stars available. It takes really accurate clocks. Well, what it also is, it's a tech demo, and I call it for the Lord's GPS, right? Kind of these pulsars, they're out there and write time signals just as accurate as the GPS or more, are putting the time signals out. If we learn how to observe them, we can use that as a time standard, and that's what we demonstrated here. So that paper already came out in Nature, I believe, Jim, right? And I can tell you, I just, on the way here, I looked at the paper that we can't talk about yet because it's under embargo, but there's amazing science coming out on the science side, also in one of these journals. And so for me, that's why we do it. It's because we love the science and we understand that the uniqueness of the tool that is there, and we take advantage of it by doing this kind of mission. We could not afford this mission right now if it was not sitting on the space station. It is exactly the right platform for this type of experiment. So we're taking that forward as we now go and look at the moon as the next kind of high ground, as we extend our human presence into deep space, which is exactly what we should be doing. The moon, of course, is a destination I've always thought about. First of all, my dog is called Luna, so you see a little bit, from the team there. But the other thing also is I told my kids, I just look forward, end of 1920, when we land again there with our industrial partners. I want to point to there and basically say, this is where we landed. Because you can actually see it. I built things for Mercury. You never see Mercury at night, because it's always on the other side of the dawn-dusk line, So I really look forward to that. Of course, we also there want to look at with humans and robotics together. That's the right way to do it. That's what we did on the space station. It's the right way to do it there. Also see it as a platform, as a series of platforms, and really take advantage of the fact that we actually can take more risks in robotics, because nothing on there has a pulse, right? So we really want to make sure that we kind of shake out these systems and kind of practice and go learn, perhaps taking more risks than we normally would, even for our space missions, because it's a strategic thrust that we want to go forward to. You, of course, have seen this, and I'm not going to talk about it, but in every case, we do one of those steps on the robotics side, whether we start with the ones already up there or the ones we're building right now. We think of them in the context of where we're going as a strategy moving forward. At the gateway, if we're doing the right thing, we're going to use the same way, these lessons that we learned at the space station, the same way for the gateway. Again, taking advantage of the unique orbit that it has, the unique platform that it is. By the way, I think that much of the science from the gateway will not be lunar science. Much of the science on the gateway will be in other disciplines, the heliophysics guys are much more excited immediately about this as an outpost for space weather measurement than any of the other disciplines, because it's absolutely clear. It can move around as it wants. Space weather hits you from whatever direction. And so for me, you can see that kind of activity. You already saw that the calls that we're putting out for missions of opportunity, we put the gateway in as one of the platforms now. And so we fully expect to use the same process that we use on a station for this infrastructure. And as we go think of that, yes, this is what Gerst's slide looks like, which is we explore. I want to also add the word discover. For me, explore and discover relate to each other really deeply, but we want to develop. So in other words, our goal is not to always do the same thing. If in 20 years we do exactly the same thing within NASA that we did now, something went wrong. Our goal is to develop capability so we can buy a capability that is out there from our industrial partners. Some companies that may not even be in existence yet, or some young companies, some of them won't make it. That's the name of the game. Some of them will. And our goal is, as we build that strategy, to also consider those stakeholders. Again, Explorers 1, not just focused on our human exploration programs, but also those stakeholders in these other worlds. Of course, we also think of Mars. Kind of as we go forward, our goal, one of the goals, and beyond, of course, but our goals is to think of Mars. And as you know, we're closing in on Mars with the InSight lander. It's always a very nervous time. I always remind myself of the fact that as humanity, we have a 40% record of landing safely. The good news is the 40% that did land safely were landed by the team that's on our side. So I don't know how other people sleep. So for me, Mars, just like any other, like the human, the lunar landscape, is just an amazing environment. It's worthy of exploration. And of course, we think right now of really building the first round trip back from Mars with samples, because that's the science priorities, but it's the first round trip because that's the first thing we need to do to actually think of bringing humans there and bringing them back. So we go in steps, thinking forward, leaning with robotics, following with human exploration, staying locked with our arms, taking advantage of when the human exploration platforms come out to really take advantage of what we're doing there. The systems, just like I talked to you on the first slide, that are being developed have transformative characters for us too. Systems both within the agency and on the outside. I tell you, the commercial cargo and eventually commercial crew here have really transformed science. The price has gone down for us to launch, and that's because of human exploration doing exactly the right thing. So for me, I'm really excited to see this go forward, but also the rockets that are being developed by the industrial partners that are there. Of course, the mission that we have in mind is Clipper, which is out there at Europa. It's a world that keeps us all up at night just because we cannot barely imagine what is there. An ocean under ice in the worst radiation environment in the solar system, but with an environment, certainly as measured from Enceladus, we don't know that about Europa, but possibly with enough energy to actually have the major ingredients that we believe are there at the transition of chemistry to biology, the beginning of life, and so many of our models, which may be entirely wrong, by the way, and we're good with that. So we want to explore together, explore with us. What are we thinking about right now? Think of Mars, just because I was right there. I could put the moon too. I think that part of human exploration on a surface in the future is actually not just an astronaut there. It's robots that are working together with that astronaut, charting a way ahead, of course, from orbit, but also from the ground. Robots that are there and can pick up, cart back, support the mission of the astronaut. That's a totally new way of thinking. We have not done that. The only place where that has really happened in detail is, of course, in the military. Well, I think that kind of work is important also here and will be increasingly important as we go forward. And really, the moment we set foot on these other worlds will be ever more important. But let's go beyond that. Think of that world I just talked to you about, Europa. For the next few decades, I'll take any bet. In 40 years or 50 years, otherwise dig me up and tell me I was wrong. But, we will not be there with humans anytime soon. But we want to explore with robots that are far beyond the capability that we have done. Landed robots that are exploring the environment, but also underwater robots that manage to get through the ice. The ice, by the way, being way thicker than is shown here, but can explore and communicate with each other, not because somebody on Earth is telling them what to do, because they have enough of the smarts to actually move things forward. That's one of the visions we have in front of us, in which robotic exploration can really be of tremendous value. Of course, that will come back. That autonomy, that will come back to the previous picture I just talked to you about on a landed surface and otherwise. And so for me, as we look back at the last 60 years, with this of course is the title page of our calendar this year, our signal of pride, the eagle there with Explorer 1 in the middle, and the recognition that everything we're doing comes from that. We can only wait where we're going forward. Again, exploring as one together with human exploration. That's what we believe in, and I believe that many of you do the same. Thanks so much.
Okay, we do have a little bit of time for some Q&A. We've got microphones coming up both aisles. I see one right over here. Can you pass that down?
Hi, my name is Jennifer Noble with the Aerospace Corporation. I just had a quick question. You talked about diverse platforms for scientific instruments and missions. How do you view CubeSats and smallsats being the future of science, and how is NASA investing in those and sort of bringing those to the forefront?
So I believe, thanks for the question, I believe that CubeSats and smallsats have an important part of the exploration of the future. And of course, I could show you how we could imagine the Earth exploration of the future with many observation points that are looking at the ground. We could imagine that these CubeSats, these small satellites, actually interact with us, provide data that are absolutely relevant to us in a way that only happens if we have enough of them. So for us, the small sats, the CubeSats, they're a tool that is the right solution for some of the problems we have. Not all of them. Some of them need to be big. It's just because of the nature of the science. But we believe that these small platforms are absolutely critical. That's why, frankly, the first strategic initiative that I affected in a direct fashion was that, to really grow that. What's just as important, by the way, is that we think of it in a different way than one of the big billion-dollar missions. We want to actually, I walk up and down on the hill, on Capitol Hill, and basically say, look, we're going to fail more with this, but I want to spend less. So it's an innovative tool, too, in which we move forward. I don't want to fail, ever. And any self-respecting scientist will put their entire life onto being sure that that mission doesn't fail. I know that. I lost a lot of sleep over my stuff. But the point is, I'm okay if we take a little bit of more risk than we normally do, and it's not going to work. So for me, the approach is to find the right tool. In each discipline, it's different. Earth science is really promising, so is heliophysics. There's some applications in the other areas. All of them are having programs right now. But at the same time, also recognize that the way we develop it also has to adjust. It's not a billion-dollar spacecraft.
Hi, so I'm Blair from the University of Maryland. So a lot of what we've been talking about throughout the past day has been sort of human spaceflight and what we're doing to work towards that. But I was curious what sort of things outside of Europa Clipper there are for long-term space plans for robotic missions to deep space.
How much time do you have? So, the answer that I would give you comes in three flavors. Relative to Earth science, our work is here to advance knowledge of the Earth as a system. And so the way we're going to do that, in accordance to the Academy's guidance that we base our prioritization on, is to actually make sure that with certain environmental parameters that are there and talk about kind of the Earth as a system, that we continue doing those measurements, but we innovate in other parts. Some of them with small satellites, others with dedicated measurements that really go after questions we don't know yet. Sometimes we overestimate what we know about the Earth, or we overstate what we know about the Earth. There's many things we don't know about this Earth, and we want to be exploring them and utilizing them for planetary sciences. Of course, I talked to you about Mars sample return. We talked about Europe, but those happen to be the two highest priorities. There's a decadal that's going to kick off in a year or two, which will give us guidance. If I had, I guess, what we're going to talk about a lot with that is the outer planets. Remember, every picture that you've seen in your textbook, 95% of every picture that you've seen in your textbook on Uranus and Neptune are from that mission that started when I was a kid. You weren't born. You know, so for me, that's, I mean, so there's other questions there. In astrophysics, you know, of course, we're trying to get Webb off. It's a really hard mission to do, trust me. And if you don't believe, go get a tour from our friend at Northrop and look at it. If you don't understand the complexity by looking at it, let's chat. The other thing is, though, there's other missions that the decadal just kicked off right now, and we're really interested to see what's coming there. Is it another kind of an exoplanet-focused one, or one that's more focused on the structure of the universe, you know, dark energy, and so forth. So I could go on for each one of those disciplines. The goal is our strategies, that science priorities are set by the academies, and we build programs around that. But really, our goal is to really find at any one time the science questions that is timely, and we can actually make a huge impact. If you want to start an astrophysics mission and you pitch that, the question I ask is, where's the potential Nobel Prize? Otherwise, I want nothing to do with it. With NASA, we leave that to the kind of fill in the edges. You know, of course, we do some smaller missions. We're targeted. Getting some new knowledge is just fine. But for a big flagship, we aim high because we owe that to our pioneers that are ahead of us. And the same is true with many of the other disciplines. Yeah.
Good afternoon. So my name is Alex from University of Illinois. So I have a question about the kind of the interhuman and robotic exploration you were talking about towards the end. So kind of based upon that, do you believe in like constructing like a system of basically either robotic that are like self-sustainable, like in a say like a even beyond like Europa exploration that can determine either making decisions or either choosing the objectives like based upon with like the advancing like the computation power we have will be like the future for like the exploration since the communication between say between a space center on Earth and then maybe the remote either rover or like even astronauts will be, the communication will be limited. Do you believe that will be like the, say the future, essentially launching like a space center into the space to complete like the exploration? Do you believe that that's going to be the future or?
Okay, now you have me stumped. This question has so many elements. I'm trying to figure out how to answer. Look, I mean, I think what's going to happen, I believe, is like if our human exploration, as our human exploration extends into deep space and we commercialize low Earth orbit, what is happening is there's new modalities of science that are becoming accessible along the lines that you're talking about. So there are kind of using that thing as a lab in a much more accessible way, not by planning decades ahead, but by really using it just the way you would go to a lab somewhere else on Earth. Has promise of the type that you're talking about. You talk about kind of connecting the data sets across the various disciplines. I mean, I have to tell you, I believe that one of the frontiers that's harder to make slides of is one that's focused on just that question, you know, how we do that. I believe that the frontier of kind of deep learning, some people call it artificial intelligence, others call it, is a frontier in which we really can learn new science in a way that we have not explored fully in most of the disciplines. I just give you a data point, and that is, if you look at the Hubble, we just talked about it, it's the most productive kind of science machine we have until something like last year or 2 years ago, most of the papers were from new data. Like somebody measured something new and they wrote down a paper. Now, most of the papers are from all the data. Do you see what I'm saying? It's kind of pulling together the body of data that are there and basically looking at it as a whole. Of course, that's a totally different tool. So it's not some grad students finding the right picture and measuring things out and building a model and writing the paper. It's a computer with a lot running hot in the basement, you know, and really addressing questions that are elusive to any single person or any group of people because of the fact that it takes the computational capability to look at all of them. Many of the questions that we're dealing with today with the structure of the universe, for example, and otherwise are of that nature. And so I believe what you're talking about, that computational network is a profound insight that I think we're spending a lot of time on.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Zurbuchen. Let's give him a big hand.
Thanks.
Okay, we're going to shift, and if I could get my next panel to start filling in. Jim is putting out the placards and the water bottles and try to get everything worked out. We're really going to have close out the day with some real thinking about where we're going. As an engineer, listening to a scientist like Dr. Zurbuchen really just kind of excites me about what it is that we do to pull things together. So I see there's a lot of students here. University of Illinois, right? How many of you from Illinois? My goodness. All right, and you all drove in one VW bus? No? Yes, okay. So we need to get the word out to get some more of your counterparts to come down because Huntsville's not bad, right? Had a good time? All right, very good. So we are going to have a nice little social this evening, and I just wanted to remind everybody of that. It's going to be at the Museum of Art. It is sponsored by two of our partners. One is KBR Wiley, and our major sponsor is ULA. And I believe we have a video from ULA. We're going to play that before we get you guys started here.
At ULA, we know what it means to put something on the line. Standing on every launch pad are lives, careers, and hard-earned reputations. For more than 120 countdowns, we've mastered the technology, and we've mustered the fortitude to put our nation's interests, our human connections, and commerce into the heavens. And now it's time to reach even higher. It's time to solve some really tough national security problems. Time to advance human spaceflight. Time to pioneer a backbone for a whole new cislunar economy. That's why we're going to harness the potential of space. Not just for our nation, but for all humanity. So let's continue breaking ground with innovations like Vulcan. Let's uphold our commitments to our national defense. And let's double down on our ambition to be the ones who shape and guide an achievable transformation in space. It's time to lead the way up there so we can help expand what's possible down here. That's why we're ULA, and no one puts more into space.
And thank you, ULA, and that's what Mark was talking about, getting excited just to get things going again. So we're going to close out the day talking about Advanced Exploration Technologies. And our moderator today is Mr. Ron Burke. Ron and I talked about having this panel many weeks ago. Ron is an Associate Principal Director of the Development Directorate within the Aerospace Corporation Civil Systems Group. Ron's done a lot. And a lot of it is in remote sensing. And after reading his resume, I could tell you a lot more. But I'm going to turn over the dais to Ron and let you introduce your panel. Thank you, Ron.
All right, thank you, Chris, for that graciously and mercifully short introduction. And I would like to just take a second to recognize what a fantastic day this has been, and give recognition to Chris and Jim Way and Alan for all of the coordination that they've done. So please join me in recognizing all of their work. I would like to expand the introduction just a bit before going into the panel, just to put in perspective the Aerospace Corporation. So we as a nation have a federally funded research and development center that is focused on the space enterprise, and the Aerospace Corporation operates that center for federal agencies across the government. So we're very pleased to have the opportunity to bring physics and engineering-based solutions and analyses and assessments to support the agencies as needed and when needed. So just sharing that perspective. One of the core functions of the Aerospace Corporation is technology application, and that's a bit of a stage setter for this panel. As Chris said, we wanted to focus the panel on those exploration technologies that are absolutely critical to accomplishing the goals of the Space Policy Directive 1 and getting to the moon and to Mars and beyond. And there are a number of very significant technologies that still need to be developed, but in the interest of time and recognizing that we were at the end of the day, we chose just 4 to really focus on predominantly. And those include autonomous operations of systems, nuclear thermal propulsion, environmentally controlled life support systems, and in-space and on-orbit assembly and manufacturing. So we're gonna focus there predominantly. We are so fortunate to have Jim Ryder, who is serving as the Associate Administrator for NASA's Space Technology Mission Directorate, who's leading and administrating a $600 million investment to mature technologies for both science and exploration, including the 4 areas that I've just mentioned: smart autonomy, in-space propulsion, life support systems, in-space assembly and servicing. And with that, Jim, I'd like to turn the floor over to you.
Okay, well, thank you, Ron, and it's a pleasure to be here today. It's been a really enjoyable day. I wish this weather would stick with us the rest of the week. Do we have the pointer, or do we just ask somebody to? Oh, there it is.
There you go.
Thank you. I really enjoyed the previous chart because it includes our tagline of the things we try to do. And that is, we invest in so that we can go, land, live, explore, and then prosper. Recognizing that the things we do, that the investments we make to further our exploration in space really are spent on the ground here. And so when we try to look at ourselves, and we really believe that technology drives exploration, so I'll give you a little bit of an overview and then try to focus on a couple of the areas that you talked about, but the panelists that are coming are specializing in those areas. But for us, the way we think of ourselves is that, first of all, we spark innovation by engaging the brightest minds, both in industry, university, and in our NASA workforce and other government agencies. And that enables exploration and discovery by embracing competition and public-private partnerships and then investing in America. And the way we do so is we look across the entire technology readiness level scale, and with a focus on things. Most of what we'll be talking about here are things that are at what we call the higher TRL, that are ready for demonstrations. But also we maintain a significant amount of our investment in early stage. Our target is to have about 8% of our budget, which is actually about $760 million. But have about 8% of our budget focused on early stage. And so these are things, whereas our overall portfolio, especially now with SPD1, is focused on especially on enabling lunar, and then but our activity is also to keep an eye on Mars and beyond as we do so. And we focus on exploration, but as Thomas just talked about, there's a very strong link between science and human exploration, and we find those things partner well together. And so we focus especially along those lines. And then in the early stage, just for reference of a few things, over our portfolio, we review about 3,000 proposals a year. We make about 700 awards a year. We have partnerships with over 300 universities, 300 university partnerships, grants in over 140 universities. We have about 400 industry partners across our portfolio. Most of them are small, but we have things in the tens of millions and then hundreds of millions even across our portfolio. And then, let's see, and there was one other one. Oh, well. I'm sure it'll come to me at some point. Anyway, so we try to take that portfolio. Oh yeah, the other one was we have about 60 things right now getting ready to go to flight of different projects and stuff. So this chart has been shown before, and I won't belabor it much here, other than to say that as we look towards, especially the investments in the lunar and with an eye towards Mars, then there's the gateway activities. As well as lander activities. And we look at the places where we fit into those as well as to Mars. And so this next chart then is a little bit of an eye chart, but it just says that a sampling of the types of investments we make for those. Communications is a big thing. The solar electric propulsion is part of our goal. Our unit is the unit that's going to be as part of the power propulsion element. And enabling about a 50 kilowatt system. Optical communications, we're doing demonstrations now that are developing for flight. That's a joint with Air Force and with our Human Exploration Mission Directorate. And actually, we also just demonstrated a couple of CubeSats. There was the OCSD project that recently is a 1.5 U CubeSat. There were 2 of them, and we demonstrated over 200 megabits per second downlink. We have the ICERA, which is an RF downlink, and it's kind of a consolidated reflector array antenna and solar array system in a way that's effectively no volume lost, and that demonstrated over 1 megabit per second. So networking, smart autonomous systems are crucial for us. We have things that are in work now for, the Gateway is a resurfacing facility is one of its things. So robotic refueling and assembly of activities is something that's critical for that. And then what I'll do is kind of talk about the lunar surface operations in the next chart. But then as we go to Mars, we're looking at things like terrain relative navigation. We're demonstrating Mars 2020. We have instrumentation that will help us on landing. We're looking at what we call a lofted program, which is one of the tallest tall poles for going to Mars is to land very large masses. And Mars has got the atmosphere that's just wrong. You know, it's kind of just the opposite of being of Goldilocks, because its atmosphere is thick enough that it causes you problems, but not thick enough to slow you down. So then hypersonic decelerators is something we're doing a demonstration of in low Earth orbit with ULA in a partnership agreement, because that same technology of an inflatable hypersonics can actually also be a large return to mass system for orbit. And then in terms of priorities for us, then when we talk about the lunar lander, so what we have done from our part is we look at which technologies can we help enable the human class exploration and landing on the moon, and also then how can we take advantage of the platforms. So we're very excited, and a strong part of the Science Mission Directorate what we call the Lander Services, the CLIPS program, because we see it as an opportunity to develop and demonstrate technologies that will feed forward. And so it's a great platform for us, and we're participating in the science calls. The Roses Call is one that's out now for people to propose against, that's mostly for science instruments as well as technology. And then we'll have calls continue as we go out. But what we're also doing is we identified 3 areas that really were the most enabling for us to accomplish the landers that also feed forward to Mars. And the first one is in precision landing. Precision landing and hazard avoidance are a number of technologies that we're in developing, and then we have what we call tipping points. We have partnerships with industry to demonstrate those technologies as well. And then so we have a program that's designed to use the small landers and feed into a mid-sized lander, and then ultimately and demonstrate those systems to feed ultimately to a human class lander, and then also use those as we go to Mars. With that, you need higher computing power than we have standardly available. And one of our technologies that we're developing is one actually with science and with Air Force, and it's on high precision space flight computing is what we call it, but high performance space flight computing. Basically it's the replacement for a RAD 750 that's been a workhorse for about 15, 20 years from science missions, and it's one that's scalable using today's technologies basically for fault tolerant architectures. And so this will be our first demonstration of that technology that will feed to exploration as we go forward. Cryo fluid management, as we get into larger landers, performance is critical, and long-term storage of cryogenics is something that we're investing very heavily in right now. We have a number of contracts in place with industry, and we've gone through a roadmap for those and identified 25 critical technologies, identified which ones can be demonstrated on the ground, and those that need an orbit demonstration, and we're funding almost all of them right now, basically. And then finally, really one of the critical things to really sustain our presence in lunar space is that we need to be able to survive and operate through the lunar night. The moon is a very threatening, difficult place. It's one of the coldest places. When it's nighttime, it's one of the coldest places in the universe, and when it's daytime, it's one of the hottest places. There is no atmosphere, and it sees those. And so, and then a night lasts 14 days. It's and so that operating is through that really demands that we change the way we think about power generation. There's a number of ways that we could do that, but we recently demonstrated what we call a kilopower nuclear fission reactor at about a 1 kilowatt level. It was a joint project with the Department of Energy. And we demonstrated that and demonstrated its fault tolerance and ability to manage. And right now we're in the process of going through a pre-formulation activity to see about fitting this on a potentially mid-sized lander. With that, then in situ resource utilization, of course, is a critical item as we go forward. And it needs a power source, though, so the two couple well for us to have. And so those 3 are the primary technologies, but we have a number of other things as well as we go forward. And I'll turn it over then back to you, Ron.
Jim, thank you so much. To Jim's left, we are joined by Dr. Jonathan Certain, Vice President for Advanced Technologies with BWX Technologies. Jonathan has advanced the use of machine learning and data analytics for Earth science. He's pioneered imaging of the sun's corona, and he's here today to share progress plans and challenges for developing nuclear thermal propulsion systems. We understand that Jonathan is an avid adventurer, so no doubt he will take us on some exciting journey here.
Well, we'll see. Yeah. Thank you for that, Ron. So I figured what I would do is, many people really don't know who BWX Technologies is, at least in aerospace, so a bit of a small introduction on our behalf. So we're a pure nuclear company. We only make nuclear reactors and systems for nuclear reactors. We've built about 300 nuclear reactors to date, including the first ones for the Rickover Navy. Just recently, we passed 1 million miles flown in the oceans in service of the nuclear Navy. We have about 6,000 employees scattered over a variety of different locations in the United States and Canada. We also manage an operation in Canada to do a lot of the servicing of the CANDU nuclear fleet. We make fuel for the nuclear Navy, a lot of the research reactors across the Department of Energy complex and for the military, as well as the CANDU in Canada. Little tie into Thomas Zurbuchen from earlier. If ever needed, we also make robotic systems to fly through the containment vessels within the pressurized water, boiling water reactors, so we know how to make semi-autonomous robots that operate in a high radiation environment in case anybody ever needs one of those. So, as I said, we've got operations scattered throughout the United States, both for manufacturing of nuclear systems, but we also have a large footprint within the DOE. The DOE has a number of different sites, laboratories, national labs in a variety of different areas, and BWXT has some role in management and operations of those different sites, 14 of those different sites. We also have management operations enterprises with Michoud and Stennis. So BWXT has a fairly long history in space exploration and development systems, starting in 1959 with the Project Mercury. We've developed systems for Orion, the Apollo missions, Skylab, a number of different variants of nuclear thermal propulsion. Our first NTP contract, Jim, was in 1987, so we're really looking forward to that in-space demonstration of that thing at some point in my lifetime. So we've been building NTP designs for a while. We're ready to build an NTP for real. Recently, Jim and STMD awarded us a contract to help develop a nuclear thermal propulsion system, a reactor for an in-space propulsion system in collaboration with Marshall Space Flight Center, Aerojet, Rocketdyne, and Dynetics. So we've been working on that for the past several years.
It's gone very well.
And we are very excited about the progress we've made. We recently tested systems in the CFEAT separate effects test setup here at Marshall Space Flight Center, and soon in FY19 we'll further those tests in the NTREES test setup, and then later in FY19 start some testing of fuel test specimens in the TREAT reactor at the Idaho National Lab. So we're very excited about the progress we're making and very much look forward to continuing that program. So a little bit about the game-changing development funding we have for NTP. NTP is a highly enriched or a high-assay LEU fueled nuclear reactor. It's designed to output 500 megawatts thermal power using a ceramic metal fuel, CERMET fuel, for eventual manned exploration. The current design for what's called the Copernicus architecture would have 3 such engines that each generate a substantial amount of power. I'll talk about that in just a moment. 19.75 high-assay LEU is non-proliferable nuclear fuel. So this is not something that can be used to make a weapon. However, it has a high energy density, sufficient enough to actually make the type of power necessary to get the thrust and ISP that really do benefit human exploration in lower transit times and launch abort scenarios. So in addition to the design of the reactor and the development of the fuel elements, we're also working with Stennis and STMD for the licensing and design of the ground test system. So we're very, very honored, pleased, and excited to continue those efforts in FY19. So for those that don't really understand what nuclear thermal propulsion is all about, we thought we'd introduce you very quickly to that. Effectively, propellant is heated by the reactor and expelled and thermally expanded through a nozzle. The low molecular weight of the propellant is directly proportional to specific impulse. So the lowest molecular weight propellant we can choose is hydrogen. It turns out you can use other things, but it lowers the ISP. Hydrogen is by far the best propellant. ISP is directly proportional to the exhaust temperature. So if you can make a fairly exotic reactor, commercial reactors operate at about 600 Kelvin. The one that we've been designing with NASA operates between 25 and 3100 Kelvin. So that's a very different type of metal that you use for the cladding, for the containment of the reactor and its fuel. But the higher you can operate that reactor, the higher you get the ISP. Thermal power is also directly proportional to thrust. So to get to 500 megawatts of thermal, when you design something to 500 megawatts thermal, you get about 100 kilonewtons of thrust. So you take that combination with the high operating temperature and low molecular weight propellant, and you get a 900-second ISP, 35,000 pound thrust system. So in the design, we will use this high-assay LEU fuel, and the amount of uranium that you'll expend over the course of the one Mars transit and back is about 100 grams for the 3 reactors. It's about the size of a marble. So you have a lot of fuel left over in that transit. So this is a highly reusable system, very relevant for the other topics on the panel today. So the last thing here is just our summary. Very excited about the forward work, the progress we've made here at Marshall with the CFEAT tests, our future work with gaseous hydrogen and the entry separate effects tests. Look forward to continuing our progress here and for a soon in-space demonstration of this capability. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Jonathan. All right, and to Jonathan's left, we have Robin Gatens, the Deputy Director of our International Space Station, and NASA's lead for the maturation of technologies associated with environmental control life support systems. I'm betting that Robin has never met an ECLIS system that she didn't like, at least the ones that work.
Some that only I like.
Right.
I can vouch for that.
There you go. And particularly the ones that work really well. So Robin, please.
Thanks, Ron. Yeah, it's great to be here. I've spent 27 years at Marshall Space Flight Center, 6 years at NASA headquarters, so it's like coming home to be back here. Shout out to the students for hanging in. I see more students in the audience than I do, I think, my generation, so thanks for hanging in there with us today. I'm going to talk about the environmental control and life support systems and the challenges that we're facing. Just to set everybody who may not be aware, on the space station today, we have a regenerative life support system that supports our 6 crew. It recycles about 90% of the water, and it recycles a little less than half of the air. So that sounds pretty good, but we do rely on a healthy supply chain from Earth to supply spare parts and makeup consumables, take trash away, and that's our big challenge as we go beyond low Earth orbit. How do we break that supply chain? How do we have a life support system that we can send everything we need for it and it's sustainable? So I've kind of divided this into challenges that we're facing, in low Earth orbit, and then as we go out towards the moon, some new challenges that we're going to be facing, and then on to Mars. Right now today, we're trying really hard to improve the reliability of our system that we have on space station. The crew time is precious on space station. We like to use all of our crew time as possible to conduct science. We don't want to have the crew doing a lot of maintenance. We have pieces of our life support system that the crew has had to work on a lot. We're also trying to reduce the uncertainty. We calculate something called mean time between failure, and we use that data to project how many spare parts are we going to need of these items to have a successful mission. There's a lot of uncertainty around those calculations. If we had, at the beginning of space station, for example, if we had taken that data and tried to project what we needed to take to Mars, and between the beginning of station and now, 15 years later, flying our life support system, we've reduced that uncertainty to the equivalent of several tons of spares now. We could take that trip to Mars and not have to take as much stuff with us. But it's taken us a really long time to reduce those uncertainties and to gather that data. So that's one big challenge that we're trying to deal with. And then we have our space station. Space station is the perfect test bed for our ECLA system. It's permanently crewed. We have microgravity. Our fluids act funky when you get them in microgravity versus ground, so we can't always rely on finding problems in a ground test bed. We need an on-orbit test bed. As been talked about earlier, we talk about what's going to happen in LEO, what's the future of the space station, are we going to have commercial space stations afterwards? That's the other hat I wear at headquarters, talking about that policy. For ECLS, we know we're going to need an ongoing LEO test bed. So because we need a place in microgravity to continue to test our system, it's important for us that we have something after the space station in LEO to continue that testing. So that's one kind of policy challenge that we're facing as well. So we move out towards the moon and the gateway. Now we have a few new challenges that we're trying to think about. With space station, we've launched our system and it's been permanently crewed ever since. We've never had a time where crew haven't been on board to provide the water and breathe the air. At Gateway, it's going to be crew tended, crew going back and forth. So what does that do to the life support system when we have these dormant periods or uncrewed periods? We can't leave dirty water behind. We know it will grow bugs. And potentially the hardware won't work when we go back. So we're having to think about those issues right now and how to design our system for those dormant periods. Along with that, autonomy. So how do we design a system for the gateway that can operate somewhat autonomously when crew is not there? We're not going to have this supply chain. We're going to have a supply chain to the gateway, but not like we have to the space station today. So things like getting rid of trash become even more important, and reducing our logistics needs for the gateway becomes more important. And then finally, dust. We're starting to do missions down to the surface. They're going to be coming back to the gateway. They're going to be dragging in dust. We don't have to deal with that on space station today. So that's a new challenge to our life support system to filter that out, make sure it's not a health hazard for the crew or our hardware. Going beyond the moon out to Mars, now we are really worried about, hopefully we've proven our system, but we really are worried about that spares mass that we've got to take with us to Mars. I've said before in forums like this that the key thing that keeps me up at night thinking about this future mission is when we close the door and the crew inside and what they have is what they have. And if hopefully we've guessed right on what they're going to need, how many spare parts, of which kind. But having a robust system is going to be paramount. And along with that, the more closed loop we can get with our life support system, the better. Then we don't have to provide as many consumables. If I had to pick one, robust versus closed loop, I'd rather have a robust system. Closed loop is a bonus. And then finally, this sort of related, we have other folks in our human research working more on the food system, but I put it on here because the food system has a lot of interdependency with the life support system. So food system is a big technology gap. Today, we send like 800 different menu items up to the space station. The crew eats very well. We're not going to be able to do that on a mission to Mars. How do you design a food system that provides the nutrition for the crew and remains nutritionally viable for this long period of time? We're looking at things like a garden kind of pick and eat system that the crew can have some fresh food to supplement their diet. So all of these are kind of our big challenges. And then, so how are we doing this evolution? Today, we're starting with space station. We're already we're already doing this. We're evolving the system we have on the space station today into the system we believe is our deep space exploration ECLIS system. And using station as our test bed to do long-term testing of that system and prove that it is reliable. I'm super excited because on the next flight, the NG-10 launch, we're flying up our double toilet stall. So we're flying next year, we're going to be flying a US commode. Today on space station we have a Russian commode. And we're going to be flying a US commode. And in order to accommodate the two toilets, we're adding a double toilet stall to Node 3. That doesn't sound like a big deal, but when you're an ECLIS person, that's a big deal. So we're going to have, the stall is going up ahead of the toilet. It's going to be fun for the astronauts to install that guy in Node 3. We've got a lot of hardware we're going to be flying next year. We've got one of 3 CO2 removal systems that we're going to be demonstrating. Flying next year, we've got a brine processor that's going to be taking the leftover waste from our urine processor, that 10% of water that we throw away today, and it's going to recover the water from that last 10%. We're going to be demonstrating that. We've got an atmosphere monitor flying next year. So this is a whole lot of stuff about to happen, and we're trying to get all of this hardware evolved on station by around the 2022 timeframe so that we can do this kind of long duration test. From there, like I said before, we're hoping we can transition onto a commercial platform and keep this test bed going in LEO because I want to still have the ability, we're working on new technologies all the time. I'd really have a hard time flying a brand new technology on a deep space mission to Mars without first testing it in LEO. So I want to have a test bed in LEO where we can continue to infuse new technologies and test them. From there, the gateway, we're starting to work on ECLIS concepts for the gateway. Initially, we're probably going to have what we call our short duration ECLIS or more open loop ECLIS, more Orion-like, and then evolve that to our fully regenerative system, hopefully, where we recycle more of the air and the water, and then use that as a proving ground for when we do the trip to Mars. And then we got surface missions that we're looking at. If we do, it depends on if it's an excursion type of mission only. That's going to be our more open loop short duration ECLIS. If we're talking about something like a lunar base, that's going to be more of our regenerative system. So what we're doing in LEO will infuse all of these different mission scenarios going forward. So that's what I had. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, so just again resonating with Jim's mantra of go, land, live, right? We're stepping right down that path. Explore, we've heard a lot about today, but also the finale is prosper. And so rounding out our panel is Al Tadros, the Vice President of Space Infrastructure for Space Systems Aral. Al's 27 years of experience on 13 missions informs his passion for the nexus between commercial and government capabilities and really leveraging the benefits of commercial capabilities to serve government missions. And that's an important aspect of the sustainable capabilities in space. As we look forward to an increasingly vibrant space economy, Al, we look forward to you sharing with us the challenges of actually physically building things in space. Please.
Great. So the year is 1945, and von Braun has been busily working on rockets and seems to have found time to do an Army study to think about what humans will do once rockets can take them to space. He finishes the study, and this graphic depicts what he comes out with. A toroidal space station that's about 50 meters in diameter, and not only has the concept figured out, but he lays out the ECLIS for how this is going to help humans survive. It's going to provide a 1G gravity environment. It's going to have algae that scrubs the air, provides the oxygen. It's going to have water purification system, a power system that concentrates solar light onto mercury to heat in a heat engine. He's got it all figured out down to space taxis to move people around the space station. This is the start of the vision for what are we going to do once we are in space? How are we going to survive and live in space? And this is 20 years before we actually put humans in space. Much of the science fiction, other concepts, growing toroidal space stations grew out of this era and posed the opportunities for us today. I'll take a little side here since half the room are students. I was inspired to be in the aerospace industry by a competition that in the early 80s allowed students to pose experiments for the space shuttle. The student involvement program for a space shuttle allowed not only ideas to be generated, but competitions to be had to identify how you would commercialize. How would you get a sponsor? How would you get funding? How would that experiment have relevance to industry? I won a regional competition in 3 states and came here to Marshall Space Flight Center to present in 1985. Unfortunately, January of '86, this Challenger accident ended that program. If there are any people from Marshall Space Flight Center here that were involved in that program, I'd love to talk to you. But this is the kind of experience that jazzed me, along with others, teachers and other experiences, to go into aerospace engineering. And I'm happy to be back here and talking today. Over the last now 50, 60 years, as we started going into space more and deploying more systems, robotics has been fundamental to our ability to persist in space. Robotics has led the way in many domains. Robotics now have been deployed on Mars, as Thomas has talked about before, in dust environments to drill and sample the environment. They've been used along with humans on the Space Shuttle program to service the Hubble Space Telescope, deploy satellites, and robotics were used to actually assemble with astronauts the International Space Station. Robotics have been part of our space environment and architectures from the beginning. Even today, on a daily basis, the robotics are used for the external maintenance and installation of science payloads and execution of the missions on the outside of Space Station. That is an ongoing activity. Johnson Space Center has control for the robotics. Marshall here does a lot of the payload operations that go on the exterior. This is an ongoing and great proving ground for how we can operate platforms and destinations in preparation for humans, during human presence, and after their presence, both in orbit around Earth, Moon, and on the surface of the Moon. So currently, we are fortunate to be working on multiple satellite servicing programs that are using robotics to be able to affect satellites that not only are designed to be serviced, but satellites that are not designed to be serviced. This is a NASA program called Restore-L. It's from Jim's group, the Space Technology Mission Directorate, to be able to take robotics, launch them in low Earth orbit, rendezvous and berth with Landsat 7, be able to, what you're seeing here, uncap, unscrew, and then refuel the satellite that was never designed to be fueled. However, it was fueled on the ground. There are tools and processes for fueling it, so the robotics have to be able to do that. Close it up, and then separate it, and demonstrate that you can do that on a reliable basis. That is the start of what we have to be able to do regularly in order to persist in space with humans beyond Earth orbit. The ability to refuel, to resupply, to dock, all these skills that we're going to be demonstrating on Restore-L. Another program that we're working on called RSGS, or Robotic Servicing of Geostationary Satellites, goes a little bit further, but also in a geostationary environment. It actually uses robotics to inspect potentially a damaged satellite, to be able to dock, berth, and repair the satellite, refuel the satellite, add payloads or enhance the satellite, all with satellites that were not designed to be serviced in orbit. So geostationary orbit has about 300 commercial satellites, another 100 or so government satellites. It's a great market for commercial business, and hence DARPA set up a program that's not only technically innovative, but also commercially innovative. And this is the kind of thing that NASA is now looking to do more and more with partnerships to deploy technologies like in-space robotic assembly and manufacturing, not only for their benefit, but then sustained on a commercial basis. So part of this, although you see the robotics, there's a whole ecosystem that has to occur, and access to space is part of that ecosystem in order for satellite in-space assembly and manufacturing to survive. So SSL has been working on the ability to actually deploy small payloads off of commercial satellites in order to resupply satellite servicing vehicles. Geostationary orbit is not quite as easy as putting a dispenser on a launch vehicle. Most of the satellites going there are actually doing their own orbit raising. So we developed a method here to actually take up and deploy payloads from the commercial satellites directly. Another application of robotics and in-space assembly that we are working now is the ability to self-assemble on orbit. So satellites are configured and constrained to fit within a fairing. However, their optimal configuration is probably best done once on orbit rather than constrained to a fairing diameter, the vibration, acoustics, shock. So being able to take robotics up with you, unpackage your deployables, install reflectors, lay out the payload is part of the future architecture. Similarly, robotics that would be used to reconfigure upper stages for future habitats are being worked. Again, this is a program that Jeffrey Manber from NanoRacks talked about a little earlier. We're partnered with them to develop and demonstrate a vehicle called Independence One, which is an in-space reconfigured upper stage of a launch vehicle. This is not a new idea, but an idea that whose time has come with the robotics and in-space assembly capabilities that are now possible. The architectures go beyond human spaceflight and for future commercial platforms. At SSL, we do a large number of commercial geosatellites. The ability to affect how we build them and how we deploy them and then how we enhance them is something that we're very interested in. Simply being able to reconfigure satellites once on orbit allows for architectures that maybe haven't been looked at or thought about before. This is a self-contained robotic system in an architecture that's very volume efficient in a launch vehicle fairing, deploying what will be a geostationary satellite, communication satellite that looks quite different than traditional satellites right now. So in-space robotic manufacturing and assembly, lots of robotics capabilities that are being developed right now. There's aspects of this that include additive manufacturing and other manufacturing techniques that are being worked by a number of people and are in part of those demonstrations that I think are quite exciting and increase the possibility of what we can do with in-space robotic manufacturing and assembly. I want to talk briefly about solar electric propulsion, which plays into this because of the efficiency of moving from space to space. Large volumes of equipment, supplies, and especially non-time sensitive materials. Right now in the commercial world, we're deploying electric propulsion, a second generation of electric propulsion that allows up to 30% more payload capacity per launch vehicle. And that's a substantial improvement over time. It's hard to get that kind of improvement from launch vehicles alone or other methods. The same kind of technology is being used for government programs, civil space and others. Jim Reuter talked about the investment they're doing in high power electric propulsion that's going to play into the gateway as well as deep space operations. Right now 6 kilowatts is fairly standard in commercial systems. There are 12 kilowatt thrusters that NASA is investing in and visions for much higher both power systems and propulsion systems. So this portrays a bit of what the potential is in the future, starting in the 40s of what space stations might look like, with a necessity to be able to assemble in orbit. We believe that the future is very feasible in achieving these kind of platforms using in-space manufacturing and assembly. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Al. Okay, and least we believe that these kinds of technologies don't come to fruition. In the early 90s, I had the good fortune of leading a program for NASA called the Commercial Remote Sensing Program, and we were advancing remote sensing technologies at that point that were at the TRL 3 and 4 level. And today, we take those kinds of capabilities for granted with Digital Globe and Planet Labs and Spire having commercial satellites on orbit. So, you know, these technologies do come to pass. Questions, please.
What will be the course of action for testing out the kilopower reactor and any larger nuclear reactors meant for space and planet habitation?
I'm sorry. I want to make sure I heard your question because I didn't quite hear it. You were asking how would we test the kilopower reactor?
Yes.
What we recently did back in March, we were at the Nevada National Security Test Site and with DOE, a joint project there. And then we had tested in one of their facilities, basically, for this. One of the reasons we picked the size reactor we did was really to make one that's simple and straightforward and fits in their facilities. And so this was a good size that demonstrates the capabilities. It also fits there. And we were able to demonstrate it through 28 hours of operations, basically that we put faults into the system and watched it react and stuff. And it did extremely well and matched all performances. So as we go forward and we're doing our formulation plan of how would we test it on a lander, there would be the natural Nevada, there would be certainly more nuclear testing that will be on facilities like that, whether it's DOE or DOD. And then there'll be others that would be just the normal processing of integrating into a system.
I guess me.
Frank?
Frank Slazer, obviously AIA. Interesting that a satellite manufacturing company is coming up with a system to service, refuel, and repurpose existing assets that are out there. What do you see in the long term? Because the last few years, geosynchronous satellite orders have been dropping a little bit worldwide. What do you think the impact of that technology will be on the demand for geosatellites in the future as well as for launch services?
Yeah, very good question. So the commercial geostationary satellite business has been around for about 35 years. It only survived through innovation. Over the last 35 years, it's been a dramatic change in technologies that are used, in frequencies and coverage and service provided, right? So lithium-ion batteries, right, alone, electric propulsion, dramatic change in capabilities and performance. The necessity to develop and innovate is that geostationary satellites are not a market on their own. They're part of a telecommunications industry that is very quickly changing. To stay relevant, that's the necessity. So we don't see this as a disruption any more than we saw Ka band as a disruption to C band or KU band. It's a natural progression. It's a cost efficiency that has to be achieved in order to make it relevant in the telecommunications market. And we've been fortunate along the way to be part of the technology innovators in that commercial business. So right now, our corporate family includes MDA in Canada and our Pasadena group, which has been building most of the robotics that showed earlier. Of course, MDA provided the robotics for station through the CSA contribution, Canadian Space Agency contribution. So the existence of the robotics and the existence of our commercial satellite market allow us to put those two together in order to innovate the commercial market. Hopefully that answers your question.
And I'll add, since your Dragonfly is a technology that we're partnering with you on, that's the in-orbit assembly part is actually can be transformative on the capabilities that you can introduce.
Right. The satellite which you saw self-assemble reflectors is something we're doing in partnership with NASA, and has relevance, cross-cutting relevance, hence it's in STMD, has huge potential because as you get larger Ka reflectors, you can provide smaller spot beam, more frequency reuse, which provides higher throughput commercial satellites. Price point goes down, it's all a plus. Developing and maturing and then sustaining that allows us to provide that kind of capability back to NASA and other government agencies. And we appreciate DARPA before that and NASA's partnership in investing and deploying that kind of capability.
All right, so I suppose my question is more directed in terms of nuclear thermal development, so I guess it's more to John and Jim, but everyone feel free to chime in. I guess as someone who's worked around the nuclear thermal propulsion systems, those have been in development. I know you mentioned NERVA since the 70s, and I suppose, at least from my knowledge, a lot of the challenges there are non-technical in terms of certain international treaties and such and so forth. So I suppose what my question is how are you guys, because it sounds like you had a very useful and well test on the ground here, but how are we going to test that into space, and what's your plan of attack for maybe some of the non-technical challenges you're going to have to face there?
Well, that's a great question. I hope one day to know the answer. The reality is building these reactors is something that the U.S. government and BWXT and others in industry have the capability to do. Fitting them within a proper fairing, understanding their use case in space, that's design work, that's engineering work, that's some development work that can be done and will be done. Solving the regulatory and policy implications for launching fission-based systems into space is a challenge that the government's also attacking as well. So the National Space Council, OSTP, and members of the OSTP FFRDC group are working with NASA, with DoD to understand what the insert process should be and what revisions should be considered to make this something that's doable with the proper safety in place, but without the regulatory impediments that may prevent those activities. Radioisotope launches have occurred on, I don't know, 30 some odd, is that right? 30 some odd science missions over the course of, starting with Voyager. So MMRTGs and related technologies like that have been launched, but it's an egregious process. I think the OSTP crew that's working on it would tell you that if you tried to determine a single path forward, it looks just like photon transfer from the radiative environment of the sun all the way out through the convection zone and into the solar wind. It's a random walk. So making that thing work in a reliable, effective way so that the dollars being spent are dollars being prepared or dollars being applied to making sure that it's safe without making it a regulatory burden is very important. So I think having a demonstration mission drive through that, whether that's an on-surface power system like kilopower or an in-space propulsion system, really is going to be the use case. It's going to help the government figure out its way through that regulatory thing, as well as solving the remaining technical challenges that'll make this a useful technology as humans expand to live and work in space. Thank you for the question.
I would say that nuclear, both power and propulsion, is really transformative of how we go forward. And if there's one thing we can do is get there a whole lot faster to be important. And what I would say is the environment is right now to be introducing nuclear systems beyond the radioisotope systems. And in some ways, those are easier to get through the system because they can be controlled so that they're safe during the actual launch process. So, but the environment is good on the regulatory side as well. And as Jonathan said, there's a team working that right now that's OSTP and Space Council, and we're contributing to try to look through of how we get through that regulatory burden. And there's nothing like a flight that would help force that.
Hi. And a launch date. What's your launch date? As soon as he will fund it.
It's a partnership.
I'll pay for that later.
Hi, my question would be also addressed to Jonathan. Your answer already addressed part of my question, but I have some more on the technical side because liquid hydrogen boil-off is definitely a question to think about if you want to use hydrogen for nuclear thermal propulsion. So I was wondering if it's within the scope of your company to do this trade studies on the benefits of nuclear thermal propulsion based on the fact that it does have boil off and the requirements of radiation shielding, and also whether the use of ISRU potentially on the lunar surface would change your decision-making process in terms of what fuels to use for NTP.
Thank you for that question. Cryogenic fluid management is another initiative within STMD that Jim's organization is funding heavily. Blue Origin and several other companies recently received awards to study those. So it's not a BWXT thing. We make nuclear reactors and that's it. So, but for these systems to be useful in space, we need to have a sustainable fuel supply for the propellant, not for the nuclear fuel to power the reactor. So those cryogenic fluid management solutions have come a long way. Marshall Space Flight Center, Dynetics, and others here locally, as well as Blue Origin and others within the industry, have made a lot of progress in making sure that boil-off in passive systems is something that can be well controlled when the propellant is not in use, and then understanding how to flow through nozzles and valves and use pumps and turbo machinery to actuate the turbo machinery and operate the reactor. For something on planet to operate in a closed loop system, active cycle systems are a longer term solution. These are Brayton cycle type systems. The benefit of kilopower was to demonstrate a non-active system, Stirling engines. These are difficult to build, but NASA figured out, and Glenn figured out a way to do it, and they were very effective at transferring the heat out of the reactor in a safe way. All the transients that they created made that system very reliable and safe to operate. But to get the energy levels above 30, 40 kilowatts electric, you got to go to some active system. So Brayton cycle systems or some other closed loop system is going to be necessary for larger power solutions. I think NASA's done studies and their architectures indicate, at least in the near term, maybe they don't need the higher level power requirements for some of the shorter duration exploration missions on the moon. However, longer duration missions and the types of heat and electricity that are going to be required probably require these active solutions. Doesn't change the fuel. High assay LEU can be used in either instance. It's just a matter of sizing the reactor's total performance, the amount of megawatts thermal that you would get, how much fuel you have in it. As a consequence, how quickly you burn that fuel up is really the use case. So you can use a high assay LEU in either instance. You wouldn't want to go to enrichments much lower than that because the energy density drops off pretty quickly. You don't really need to go to enrichments much higher than that. It does lower the total weight, but it's not necessarily the case that you have to do that with new advances in manufacturing that allow you to put all the U-235 in the positions that you need it and not have to pack it all in there because of the enrichment.
I guess my question was more in terms of if we may, in the interest of time, thank you very much for the excellent questions and encourage the follow-on afterwards for sure. But let us all thank the panel for the outstanding contribution.
So y'all have stayed to the end. Therefore, you deserve to know what the Battlestar Galactica effect is. Some of you remember it from last year, and we've seen a little of it this afternoon. Battlestar Galactica was the first TV show where they had spacesuits with lights on the inside of the visors showing the face of the people. You know, those of us that have worked in space a little bit and have seen and touched real spacesuits and maybe played with them a little bit, know you can't do that because the astronaut would be blinded. But I have noticed a little effect like that in different venues like this and different conferences. When your audience starts getting a little tired and starts nodding off, years ago, they would just nod off and put their head down. Today, when they put their head down, it may be illuminated as though they're in a Battlestar Galactica spacesuit, because that illumination comes from this little thing called your cell phone. It's more prevalent with the youth, although some of us older people are beginning to do it more and more now. So as people up here start seeing faces out there being visible beyond the blindness we have from these spotlights up here, when we start seeing your faces be visible because of the illumination from your cell phones, then it's time for us to stop talking and move forward. So that's the Battlestar Galactica effect. So this concludes day one of the 2018 Von Braun Symposium. And now we're going to go to our evening reception. I'm going to read this carefully because I don't know where all this stuff is, so I will try not to screw it up too badly. It's at the Loretta Spencer Hall at the Huntsville Museum of Art. Now, it's made possible by United Launch Alliance, who is our primary sponsor, but also KBR Wiley is helping out on this. To get there, just head east on Holmes Avenue. East on Holmes Avenue, take a right on Church Street. And somewhere over the next 15 or 20 or 30 minutes, you'll run into it. That's the instructions I have, guys. I don't have any better. Now, parking is available at the museum with overflow at the Progress Bank and the Medical Plaza diagonally across the street. So go on Holmes, go east, get out your little cell phone and get your compass so you figure out which way is east. It's not intuitively obvious to me. I'm too far away from the ocean to tell. Or you just plug it into Google, and they'll take you to the wrong place. So, but come and enjoy some food and drink. We've got the posters over there from the student poster competition. Those of you who did not see them last night, please go and look at them. Some of them are really, really quite good. And some of the students will be there. We hope you all can make it tomorrow. We have our networking breakfast up in here starting at 7. Sponsored by Northrop Grumman, and our first session starts at 8. And also tomorrow is a very busy day. We've got lots of folks going to be here, including the administrator, Jim Brandenstein, will be speaking at lunch. So thank you for coming today. Hope you had a good time, and we'll see you at the reception tonight.